Okay,
Thank you.
so we're hot?
We're
Okay,
ready.
I can see, I can hear. It won't let me start my video because host has stopped it. I think I'm good. That's Commissioner Commissioner Cumbus. Okay, just take a look at that. He said he can see and he can hear. Wait a minute, I can see and I hear. It won't let me start my video. So maybe it's something on this end. You can just.
Dr. White, can you hear me?
Okay, okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started.
Okay.
All right.
Bring
Oh,
our-
wait, we need to have them, we only have.
Yeah,
Gilbert Wright.
tell the, Professor Mena, could we get you to, show your face?
And
Gilbert.
Professor Gilbert, you as well, and Ms. Wright, could you show your face as well? As we dabbling in?
Miss,
and we need to keep.
Mr. White, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Not optimally, but yes, but I need you to, turn
I-
your video camera on.
Yes, it says, I'm getting a message that says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Okay,
Is there some way that
yeah,
could be
we're working on
undone?
that now.
Okay,
Dr. White, it's Kevin. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I have the same message as well, so we
Yes,
can't.
sir. We're working
So-
on it now.
Yes, sir. Just making sure you can hear me as well.
Click it. Click there.
Professor Mena, Ms. Wright, Dr. Gilbert, see if you can start your video now, along with Commissioner Cumbus. Okay, all righty. And the same with you, Commissioner Cumbus. Thank you, sir. Good to see you, sir. Okay, so I think we see a quorum.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'd like to bring this committee meeting to order here for State Anatomical Advisory Committee, March 7th, 9 a.m. here. We'll do a roll call.
Yes,
Dr. White, you want to go
yes,
through the roll call?
yes. Dr. Ali,
Yes, sir.
Dr. Hubbard. Thank you. Dr. Gilbert.
I'm here.
Yes, sir. Good to see you, sir. Good morning. Professor Mena.
present.
Yes. Ms. Bethany Wright.
Here, good morning.
Good morning. Good to see you. Professor Lepaski. Okay, we have.
Okay. So we have a quorum. Thank you, everybody. We're going to go through our Pledge of Allegiance, invocation, those things. We'll
Yes.
Go ahead and knock those out. Who do we
Okay.
have for our invocation this morning?
We'll have Commissioner Cumbus on our invocation. Yes, sir.
What did you need?
Just a short invocation, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we may need to get some volume on the, yeah, we got some volume. Okay.
Prayer?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for the opportunity that we have to come together to make decisions that will impact families, the medical industry, and our commission. Lord, thank you for all of the professionals that are here with us today and helping to make those decisions. Help us to have clear minds and open minds as we do that, dear Lord. Thank you for all that you do for us and our blessings that we have every day in you. I pray this in Christ's name. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we will do our pledge of allegiance and then our Texas pledge too. So I'm happy to lead the pledge of
Yes,
allegiance.
please do, sir.
There's our flag in here.
Our flags are back here.
I pledge allegiance
To the
to the
flag
flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Texas flag.
Yes, sir. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God and indivisible.
Okay. Good morning, Commissioner Tips.
morning.
Before we do some housekeeping, could I just have, Ms. Haynes work with the volume? To the folks that are assigned, that are coming in through Zoom, can you hear us optimally? You can, okay. So it's us being able to hear them optimally, okay?
PVC.
Okay, so, Mr. Chairman, we do have two commissioners with us this morning. We have Commissioners Tips and Cumbus. Commissioner Cumbus is, with us on Zoom, and Commissioner Tips here is with us, in person. So, if we could just start with them providing some greetings from the commission. We could start with Commissioner Tips.
Sure.
Okay, because they can hear us very well, and we can kind of do two things in one time and allow, Ms. Haynes to continue improving the sound to us from Zoom, okay? Yes.
Commissioner, thank you for being here today.
Yes,
Appreciate
sir.
Your presence. Love to hear from you. Any feedback or
Thank you.
anything that's going on?
Well, you all are doing wonderful work so far, and thank you all for your time. I look forward to hearing how things are progressing, and thank you for letting me be here today.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for being here.
All right, how you think it's looking now, Ms. Haynes?
We can't have somebody jump in and mention.
Okay.
Good
All
morning.
right, we're gonna try and see here, Commissioner Cumbus, how well we hear you now. Thank you for being with us, and the chair would like to recognize you to provide any, comments or greetings from the commission.
Commissioner, I think you're on mute right now, sir.
So
There you go.
just looking forward to being in on this meeting and understanding and hearing kind of where we are at with our advisory committee. I know that you have met before, and I was not able to be in on that, but I'm actually able to do that today, so I'm anxious to get in on that. And from a commission standpoint, thank you for what you are partnering with us to do as required by our House bill or our Senate bill. So thank you all for attending and giving us guidance on what we need to do moving forward.
Thank you, sir, for being here. We appreciate it. And we're still working on the volume here to be able to hear you. We're hearing you at like a 1 out of 10 right now, but it's not your fault. I think it's our speaker system in here,
Yes.
and we're working on that right now.
Which we can hear us first.
Dr. Gilbert, are you able to hear me? Okay, great. This is where the field. All right, let's try this again. Can everybody hear me? Just maybe a wave. Okay, great. And then, Dr. Gilbert, will you just say hello real quick and just make sure we can hear you here?
Howdy, how y'all doing?
Okay, good. All right, we got everybody on audio now on my computer, if it makes it long enough.
All right.
Do we have an extension cord?
Okay. Let's use my.
Oh, I have an Apple. It's not gonna work, unfortunately.
Okay, so let's do this. Once you get started.
Sure.
I've got one down in the office.
Okay.
In my office, and I'll go down and get it. Okay, all right.
Okay.
Yeah, you want to start off with some housekeeping issues real quickly, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Let's do that.
Yes, and so just looking at an overview of the agenda. Obviously, we're going to have some rulemaking stakeholder discussion on the rule regarding our inspections. Okay, and this is probably the meat, one of the meats, but a meat of a big piece of what you guys are helping us out with as far as drafting the rules. So we'll be taking more comment, okay, possibly from the public may want to weigh in, obviously from the committee members. It should not be our intention today to say that this is the language that we want the commissioners to approve. So we'll have robust discussion, robust, thoughtful discussion today, and then probably get another draft and come back next meeting, and you'll probably be in a position to get something agreeable, okay, with everyone. Ms. Hartsfield has also worked on getting some of our district attorneys to discuss with us the abuse of course. We talked about that last meeting, and last meeting, of course, the idea is that in our rules, we have to be able to make sure our rules provide good guidance, okay, to our licensure community, to the public, in concert with our law enforcement partners on that particular issue. So, Ms. Hartsville, we know the schedule of our district attorney. So how do you think we should handle that?
I know for sure one will pop on at 10:30 and he has a very limited time, but I know we have a couple that are already with us, so we can start discussion and then we can if they don't have any other, once they've kind of given what feedback they may have, we can switch over to the inspections and then come back at 10:30 for abuse of corpse or.
Mr. Chair?
I think that's great. I think if we have a couple of the people online right now, let's go ahead and.
The district attorney?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Absolutely.
and you're confident that we can flex with the agenda this way?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you so much, counsel. So, Mr. Chair, if you want to
Why don't I give some background
background?
for,
Yes.
we have Mr. Sandoval and we have, Ms. Williams. Is that correct? Those are the two people we have online right now.
Okay.
I want to thank both of you guys for being online this morning. Appreciate it, taking your time out of your schedule. Just a bit of background on why we have, your two, organizations online today to help us out and get some feedback from you. As we look at the, statutes on abuse of a corpse,
there are some things that we do in the medical field and training, bioskills labs, cadavers, dissections that may fall in the gray zone for your organizations if you're looking at it from the legal side. So we just want to make sure you understand what we're doing in this world of anatomical usage of people who've donated their bodies to science and the facilities that are approved to do these things. In general, as we go through medical school and we go through residency, or nurses go through their training, or surgical techs go through their training, when we're done with our training at our schools, at our residency programs, and we're into private practice or at our universities working to continue our skills, and I can use the analogy of a sports athlete, you got to continue doing the same thing over and over until you're really good at it. A lot of times physicians' only time to practice is on actual real patients in the real operating room when they see them. So part of the training program, as technology has advanced so much in AI and navigation systems, the surgeons no longer can just learn this stuff out in the hallway from a device rep. They need to come in months in advance and actually do training on cadavers to be able to up their skills to the point necessary. And now the FDA has even put out rules and regulations that they need to be certified on some of these robotic systems that have a lot more to when it comes to technology and artificial intelligence and those types of advances, that you just can't pull this off by learning that morning and doing it that afternoon with a patient. With our medical students, nursing students, dental students, as they progress, they need anatomical dissections to be able to understand the body, understand the physiology and anatomy behind it. So there's that dissection. In the private practice world, physicians from all around the world fly to these anatomical facilities. We have one here in Austin, Texas, where probably on each weekend there's up to around 100 to 150 surgeons flying in from around the world to learn their trade with their device company partners, where we go through a lot of this dissection. There may be disarticulation. There may be just specimen pieces put out, depending on what it is. All of this is through consents from the patients or the people that have donated their bodies to science. They knew exactly what was going to happen throughout the process. It's all been documented. And the full cycle of receiving a donor to the point of cremains are returned back to the family. That's all documented, very controlled. And so that's kind of our world of what we're doing. But we wanted to invite Mrs. Williams and Mr. Sandoval and just kind of get some feedback or maybe some background for you guys and things that have been in the gray zone and what things do not go okay with you and what things we need to consider to kind of have the two groups aligned well. So I don't know which one of you would like to jump in first and give us your thoughts and ideas in any kind of case scenarios that have occurred that we need to kind of discuss and go over. What's that? Okay, and Mr. Cox is online too. Why don't I start with Mrs. Williams? Are you available to chat, Mrs. Williams?
I am. Can you see me?
Yes, ma'am. We can see and we can hear you just fine. So if you want to introduce yourself so everybody knows who you are, we'd appreciate it.
So my name is Marcella Williams. I am actually the legislative liaison for the DA's office. So I might not be the best person to start with. Because I am in the appellate division. But one of the first things that I was curious about that y'all might be able to help me with is because when we're talking about like the willed body program, and the situations in which someone has donated, or are a donor in and of themselves, when you get your license, those are all legally valid situations. And our abuse of corpse statute says that you abuse of corpse without legal authority. So I was really curious as to what your current rules are in regards to where we think a gray area actually exists, because we see this abuse of corpse in like murder situations and hiding bodies and, nefarious, just awful situations, not necessarily where there's a will or a document that says we're providing our body for research.
Sure. No, I mean, we certainly have our statutes that allow us to receive on the front end, and how that's done is very well regulated on the consent paperwork and on the transfer of that body. And obviously there's two ways to donate. One is the patient themselves or the donor themselves pre-signs up ahead of time. The other is the next of kin does the donation. And so, you know, the paperwork, the consents, the rules that we have to follow, all those things allow that transfer of that donor to the World Body Program or the non-transplant anatomical donation organizations. Those are the two organizations you can donate to here in Texas. From that point, you know, what happens with that donor body and where it goes is also under the purview of the state Anatomical Advisory Committee as to what facilities are approved where they can go, and then what things can be done there and what type of facilities and security and all the things that need to be followed there, all the way to the point of what crematorium they could be sent to, that they need to be approved Texas crematoriums, and then how the remains are sent back to their family. All those things are in our statutes, and kind of we go by those to make sure that they're all followed. So that's kind of our legal route of having the bodies donated to the World Body Programs or the NATOs. Yes.
And Ms. Williams, this is Sarah Hartsfield. So in Texas Administrative Code, Title 25, Rule 479.5, that's what is currently housed. I think I sent that over. That's what the rule that the Anatomical Board had in place. And so we're looking at that as our starting point, and then seeing how we may need to tweak it or whatnot, or again, just trying to think forward thinking with everything. So in addition to what Dr. Ali mentioned, I mean, we're trying to think also worst case scenarios of like, okay, well, maybe they forged the paperwork, and maybe like, did we have a bad actor funeral established that maybe thought they could get some business this way? So did they create a next of kin donation? Did it bury their the decedent and then actually use that to, so just making sure all the steps in the process, just seeing if there's any gray area. There may be context that y'all have come across that you may not think automatically this is what would fit, but if there's something that just in reading the rule, they're like, hey, if we ever come across this, maybe better definitions, or if you can clarify this for us. I don't know if that that kind of helps. I'm very new to this area, so I'm also like Dr. Gilbert, Mr. Wright, Professor Minna, then Dr. Ali. I know they're in this all the time, so they may be able to give some more examples of just like day to day, but then that's just kind of, we just kind of want to hear, you know, again, as we're rulemaking, just making sure it fitting in of what y'all would do on the prosecution, and if it ever did end up in court of abuse of corpse in this type of situation, where maybe it was a borderline education, like maybe that it was a fake, maybe somebody forged it. You know, I don't want to give so much like examples on public, but if I don't know if that just kind of helps. So just thinking some of the forms that are needed, or just think of your bad actors who could try to like take advantage of the education process. So.
It does. Thank you for pointing me in that direction. And I'd like to defer to someone else for a few minutes, please.
Okay.
Mr. Sandoval, thank you for being here this morning.
We come into these cases when people are disinterring bodies and moving bodies, and from reading your rules and looking at the statute, I think the use of the phrase, as Ms. Williams pointed out, is without legal authority kind of captures what you're regulating, because folks would be acting with authority. They would be avoiding any type of culpability or criminal liability. If we have nefarious bad actors, I think there's a number of statutes that would come into play to allow us to do our job in holding bad people accountable, whether it's tampering with a government record, tampering with evidence, trafficking. I mean, was trafficking in human organs. Purchasing or selling human organs. I think that when we start talking about people with ill intent, we've got a number of resources available to us other than the abuse of corpse statute that allow us to hold them accountable. But I think most of the time what we're looking for to prosecute someone is their criminal intent. Are they doing something nefarious? And two, is it going to fit in the elements? And I think as written, your rules seem to capture everything and what you're envisioning. I don't foresee them in a conceivable, and hypothetical potentially committing a crime in what they're doing. I mean, I would, defer to the other prosecutors here, and then I should have introduced myself. I'm the first assistant for Cameron County. Well, we're the most southernmost county. So, and thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Mr. Cox, I know you've just joined here. Love to get your input on what we're doing and anything that's going on in your district.
Sure. I'm Greg Cox. I'm the first assistant in Hayes County, San Marcos, just south of Austin. We have the body farm here at Texas State University. So some of these issues have definitely been thought about in our office. Looking at Administrative Code 479.5, the way this would work from a prosecutor's standpoint, if someone is accused or investigated for abuse of a corpse, the language in the actual statute in the penal code, 42.08 of the penal code, says that they do one of these things without legal authority. So we would be looking to this particular administrative code provision to determine whether someone has proper legal authority or not. And as I've been reading through it, which I apologize for not doing my homework beforehand, but I've been reading while everyone else was talking. I think this covers most situations. And if someone is doing this nefariously, we would be able to, it would require somebody from the board to come testify as a witness to say that it does not fall within this rule. And that's kind of how this would play out in court, is we would put on our case and we would call someone from the board to come in and say that the activity that was going on was not within these rules, just so that everybody that's now assuming some responsibility for this understands what we would need as prosecutors to be able to move forward. The situation we're having right now in Hayes County is we have some fairly aggressive folks connected to a organ donation organization that are operating in this part of Texas. That we have one JP that the biggest hospital in the county falls in her district. And when someone is brought to the hospital and dies in the operating room or dies at the hospital under suspicious circumstances, to where the JP is not wanting to authorize that body to be used for organ donation yet, because she needs law enforcement to come in and take a look. These folks are reaching out to the family of the deceased and getting them to start leaning on everybody, the hospital staff, the JP, everybody, to just give the body, we want the organs donated. And it's thwarting our ability to conduct proper investigations. I don't know if that really falls into what we're talking about here, but we're seeing a level of sort of aggressive pushing on behalf of this organization that is making people very uncomfortable. And if they do something that the JP hasn't authorized, technically, I think that they might be committing abuse of a corpse, because even though they are an organization that may fall within your rules, until the JP releases the body, they still don't have legal authority to do that. And that's where we've had a little bit of trouble, is they're pushing for bodies to be released before the judge has authorized that release. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes, and it helps. Thank you for providing that example.
And, and going back to our, Mr. Chair, going
sir.
back to our enabling statute, SB 2040, I believe it's on page 13. It gives us the, I guess, a charge or requirement to aid prosecutions under 42.08 of the Penal Code. The commission shall adopt rules that clearly state the activities that are authorized by the commission in relation to the use or dissection of a body. Okay, so it's these great folks in law enforcement, these chief law enforcement officers in their respective counties. Our rules in the context of 42.08 of the Penal Code we should adopt rules that clearly state activities that are authorized by commission. And to piggybacking on Attorney DA Cox there, you know, to aid him in these prosecutions.
Absolutely.
I would like to add, with respect to the current administrative code provision, if I were in a situation where I were going to need to use this to determine whether someone's activities were legally authorized or not, and this is just drafting, whoever drafted this initially, like subsection A2, subsection A, subsection to that, little I and little II, it would be unclear to me looking at this, and this applies to the ones further down that statute, that provision as well. Is this an and between that? Is it an or? You know, it's that could be tightened up a little bit. Is it procurement of bodies for removal and transfer, or removal or transfer? Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll definitely get that tightened up.
All right.
Dr. Gilbert.
Yes, Dr. Gilbert, you had your hand up, sir.
You bet. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Sandoval, Mr. Cox, Ms. Williams, I appreciate y'all being here and giving us some of your time. I think this is an important area, and it's good to hear that the rule that has been in place is pretty sound. This is what we've been using for a number of years as the State Anatomical Board. And I think it's reasonable to review it. A couple of quick comments, and they're actually three separate things, so bear with me. What I heard from each of you is that the legal authority designation is the key to all of this. And so for this committee, I think it's very important that we consider how we authorize people to do what they do. And so one of the things that I think we didn't necessarily do well as a State Anatomical Board is provide a document that would prove or show that a facility or an entity had been approved by the state. Now, there was paperwork that showed signatures, but it wasn't a certificate. So one of the things I'd like this committee to do is to say when you've been inspected and when you've been approved, there should be some document, single document that says you have been approved for this time frame to do this work. And when then maybe there's a number attached to it. And when specimens are being transported across the state or out of the state, that license number or certification number or whatever it may be should be attached to everything that is related to that organization or that facility. So that's just my opinion. I think it would be the best way to go in terms of saying, prove to me that you're authorized legally to do what you're doing. So, for example, a Ryder truck stalls on I-35 North Stemmons Freeway headed north to Oklahoma. And for some reason, the police officer helps and wants to open the back and sees 45 heads in containers. Okay, prove to me that you have the authority to transport those heads, right? That's kind of a gruesome perspective, but that's the type of thing that's going to happen if they're in an accident or whatever. So I think that legal authorization has to be clear, and we have to have a way to display that and show it and connect it to transport of any of these specimens. So that's one thing. I don't know if there's comments or thoughts on that before I move on.
Dr. Gilbert, I do have a question. Does a burial transit permit accompany each specimen or cadaver when transporting?
To my understanding, Commissioner Combest, I don't, number one, I don't know the answer to that. I think that burial transit permits, this is one of those weird things that was not connected well between SAB and the commission. And I think as long as we had transfer paperwork from the State Anatomical Board, then that burial transit permit wasn't included because it wasn't going for the sake of burial. So I think that's right, but I can find the answer for you.
And Commissioner Combus, that's a very good question. Dr. Gilbert Gilbert and his colleagues, when they do transfers of cadavers for the use of their instruction and their work, and I think Dr. Gilbert can give us some clarity on this as well. That decedent is not, we haven't done a final that decedent is not in a final disposition mode per se.
I understand, just with our legalities of, decedents that are not considered anatomical cadavers. You know, our rule says that a burial transit, if we go across a state line, has to accompany that individual. So that was the purpose of my question was, is that already happening, or is that something that we need to consider as a tracking issue? It's not a disposition scenario.
Yeah, I think that to answer your question, I'm pretty sure that we do have transfer paperwork that was done at the state level to track that, but I do not believe it was a burial transit permit, which is why some organizations were receiving donations in other states like Oklahoma of Texas decedents. They weren't filing the burial transit permit, but were receiving, because they couldn't receive them in Texas, they were receiving them in another state like Oklahoma, then bringing them back into the state to do their skills labs. And so, but I think that's correct. I can get some more information on it.
Yeah.
My second comment is that I think I think it was Mr. Cox's comment related to transplant tissue. One clarification, and I think this is that we are not dealing with transplant tissue. So I hope that your situation would never affect this particular group, because this is strictly non-transplant tissue and cadaver work. So I'm hopeful that there's really not a time sensitive issue in the way that transplant tissue works, but your example is a good one to see how these rules are important to let you do what you need to do. The third part of this is that one of the things that's not been described, we think of, it makes sense that you have legal authority to dissect for medical school or physical therapy school. But one of the areas that kind of gets into that, maybe that gray zone, is forensic study. Those groups would still have legal authority to do that study, but to the public, it may look very different than what you would think in a sterile dissection lab. And so I think we should consider the forensics category in our discussion. The last thing that I'll say that maybe is not intended to be inflammatory, but it gets into the weeds a little bit in the context of selling a corpse. It makes sense that you can't sell a corpse, but many organizations will charge a fee for an organization to use that cadaver material or specimen. And usually that's referred to as a use fee, which makes sense. But if that tissue never returns back to that organization that sent it out in the first place, it's not a rental, it's not a lease, it never came back. So that's a permanent disposition of that specimen. How does that relate? If you received a charge for that, but you never got it back, then somebody else has it. And there may or may not be a way to determine that it actually was disposed of according to law. So I'm not trying to be inflammatory, but I do think it's something we should consider. What constitutes the sale of this tissue, and how do we provide legal authority to transport tissue for appropriate reasons? Dr. Ali does bioskills labs in his lab. We do them in our lab. They're appropriate, they're useful. But if I don't get that tissue back, have I sold it? Or is it, how do I know if I don't get it back, what happens to it then? Yeah, we can do paperwork, we can have signatures, but does that constitute a sale or not?
And Dr. Gilbert, I would tell you, just in the short time that we've been working with you in this policy space, that is not inflammatory. Actually, your comment is very thoughtful, because we've been discussing it in the office. I think as we get to maybe the rule today, you know, I may have a question is, that anatomical facility that's using, that cadaver or that anatomical specimen. I may just ask, why couldn't we have a requirement for that tissue to either be returned back to the NATO or will body program, or if that anatomical facility wishes to do so in agreement with that NATO or anatomical program, have a procedure where they can contract with a crematory.
Right.
And then send those remains back to the NATO or anatomical program. Okay,
Sorry.
so, yeah, so.
I agree.
I don't think that's inflammatory.
Okay, well, thank you for hearing me, and I appreciate the further discussion. I think that is the solution, but it's not going to be a popular one for some of our groups, so.
We'll see.
No, thank you for the comments, Dr. Gilbert.
Yeah, we'll see.
Is there anything else from our district attorneys or legal friends that are online today that we want to discuss, that anything that's come up during our discussions that we could help out with in any of your proceedings as they may come up?
The only comment I have is, as you look at any changes you're going to make to these rules, please look at chapter 49 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, which has to do with inquests and autopsies. There's a lot of language in there that pertains to the possession of bodies and body parts, the movements of body and body parts, and just be careful that you don't make a change that conflicts with any of those statutory provisions, because that could create a lot of headaches for us down the road.
Thank you, Mr. Cox.
And would you all be willing, because once we'll put something together, but would y'all be willing if we use y'all's resources to kind of get your eyes on our draft before we formally adopt anything, just for feedback of making sure it wouldn't negatively impact any prosecution?
I'd be happy to do that.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, if there's no other discussion regarding that matter, I want to thank Mrs. Williams, Mr. Cox, Sandoval team
Actually,
online.
Can I ask one question before we hop off? And it goes back to the forensic studying that Dr. Gilbert brought up. Because in your section 3 of the rules currently, I would be curious as to, and part of this is I'm not a medical professional, but is there a definition in this section 3 that would overlook what you were discussing as far as forensic study parts versus cadavers? Like, I'm sorry if I'm not making any sense.
So, Texas Health and Safety Code, section 691, I think it's the very first, section 001, it defines anatomical specimen as part of the body, including the cadaver. So usually when it's talking about the use of a whole body or anatomical specimen, that's usually when it kind of includes the body part. There is no, I think that was something I had started to look for, if we have any consistent statutory definition of forensic science in statute, and I don't necessarily think we do. I think
You don't. I can answer that one. It's not there.
So I've kind of had to jump around trying to see if there's a way we could like merge some of it to make sure, because I think that's the forensic science world has kind of come up frequently of how to make sure potential donors are informed about what that may look like, so that if their body is used for after they pass, they have full knowledge of what that entails. So that is something we will spend time addressing. So if there's something in the criminal litigation field that is kind of an acceptable, because I know sometimes courts come up with their own definitions that aren't necessarily in statute. So if there's been some kind of test or definition that has universally accepted or generally accepted, if y'all have that, I'd be more than open to any resources on that as we're working through this on the health medical education side.
I would be happy to help with that.
Okay.
We'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Dr.
And so-
Ali,
Yes, ma'am.
had a quick question, and this was a follow-up to Commissioner Combus's question. And I'm sorry, I apologize. I need a little clarity on something. The state of Texas says that a report of death must be filed in the county in which the death occurred. In this case, the burial transit permit supersedes the report of death. And Commissioner Combes, Mr. White, I think, if we're transporting via common carrier or driving out of state, those are still legal documents within the state of Texas that are required to move human remains. So I'm just trying to get clarity on why we do not need a burial transit permit. And I was digging through my records here, and I'm looking at a death certificate and method of disposition. Donation is a method of disposition, but it seems like if we only file a death certificate, we've only carried out the paperwork halfway. And to me, I see that as a chain of custody.
And I think that's something that we'll need to address via rule because of just that statute you mentioned of how per state statute, part of the final disposition is donating. So whenever you donate to a non-transplant anatomical organization or a will body program by state law, that's considered final disposition. So what we may need to do on our end of the anatomical and the commission is say, okay, but if it's donated for this purpose, final disposition is when the donated cadaver or anatomical specimen is ultimately cremated or returned to the family or however it is, but that will be a separate discussion. I mean, it will kind of be merged into the abuse of corpse to make sure of how the transfer and the disposition. But I think that's why the burial transit permit has not been required because per state law, anything after the point of donation is just extra. But I can look into see if there's anything that would prevent us from requiring that.
Sarah, I think that's correct because since donation is a final disposition, I think at that point that resource, that cadaver in the past became the custody of the state anatomical board. And so the regulations that were set forth in that statute and rule was simply tracking and transfer through that paperwork. That's, I think, why maybe the burial transit permit wasn't required. But it's a great question and something we'll have to work through together.
Thank you very much. I just was trying to get a better understanding of that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor. Okay, any other comments? All right, the next part of our agenda is to go over the rulemaking stakeholder discussion regarding rule recommendations on inspection requirements for willed body programs and anatomical facilities for the receipt and use of bodies and anatomical specimens.
Finish with our DAs.
Yes.
They want to make, they may want to stay on. It may be interesting.
Yeah, I apologize to our legal friends here. If you guys want to stay on, please do. If you've got to go run your day, please feel free, but we appreciate you guys being here. Thank you all so much for your time and your recommendations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
great
you,
day.
sirs and ma'am.
Fantastic. Okay, we had said in our last meeting to discuss two major parts to our statutes. And one is the concept of inspection requirements for willed body programs and anatomical facilities, and getting discussion and feedback from members as to what we would like to do with the rules that are there and what the suggestions have been made about adoption of any new rules or any edits. So that has been done. It's been passed back to Ms. Hartsfield. She's put together some sheets here that show some of the
This is all y'all's. I have not, we're saving this for discussion.
Absolutely. And I know there's comments on here, some in red and some in comments in the blue on the far right column. Does every board member have this, that needs to have this document that's got the edits and everything?
I can forward to Commissioner Combes if he wants it. Everybody should have received it in their emails. And Commissioner Combs, would you like me to forward you the information? Okay, 1 second.
So there should be about 4 or 5 attachments on there as we go through. And I know, Commissioner, as you get this, I'm just going to gently start on the Texas Administrative Code here that we have, Chapter 479, Facilities, Standards, and Inspections, specifically 479.1 on institutions that are authorized to receive and hold bodies, which kind of goes back to what we discussed at the beginning of the meeting of who is authorized to receive bodies and who is authorized to dissect bodies. And these next 2 sections.
Can I tell them what the document title is?
Yes,
They know
ma'am.
how
Which
to look.
document title is it that they need to click on?
So if y'all have your email pulled open, it's the document titled TAC 25.4.479 Facility Standards and Inspections dash AAA edits JW parentheses 1. Yeah.
Next time we'll make a shorter
That's
title
okay.
for our documents.
Okay.
So looking at 479.1, institutions authorized to receive and hold bodies. Section A and Section B. Section A are the approved categories. Section B are the disapproved categories. And before we get into exactly what A says and exactly what B says, a comment was made about Section B of, is this a necessary section of having?
That was probably my comment.
Well, and I think honestly, I think we probably need to just either, because I think we had this conversation in our very first or second meeting about just doing away with approved and disapproved categories because the legislature's further defined what is authorized. Or if we say approved categories, I like the part about just saying anything that is approved by the commission as or authorized by the commission, because so the anatomical committee does not have the authority to approve
Got it.
things.
Yes.
So we can make that part of it if we need something like an approved category. But I almost just think we need to say an authorized entity and maybe define that to be means those entities listed in state statute.
Council, let's do this.
Mhm.
We have folks that have been operating in
Yeah.
this for a while. Let's get the rationale of
Sure.
why we have these 2 paragraphs before we get to a possible solution. I'd just be interested.
Well, I mean, so let me ask you something, Counselor. Are you saying that, I know the State Anatomical Advisory Committee is not the authorizing body,
Mhm.
but we still have to approve these sites by inspection, right?
Commission.
The commission does.
Or the commission does.
But the committee doesn't have.
Yes.
Okay.
And
So the commission is who authorizes what groups are allowed to receive, whether will body programs, NATOs, and then
Mhm.
where they can go for dissection or skills labs.
yeah, our role as the committee is strictly advisory,
Sure. Sure.
to the commission.
And providing your expertise and
Sure.
practice in the stand.
But right now, A and B is what's written in,
The current anatomical
Rules.
board rules, yes,
Okay.
sir.
which is what is the commission is authorizing currently to follow, correct?
To the extent it does not conflict with statute, yes, sir.
Yes, okay. So if someone wants to become a willed body program or become a NATO or an anatomical facility, how are they to know what's approved and what's okay and what's not? Where are they supposed to go to see what's authorized and what's not authorized?
And-
So if I'm
Mhm.
Dr. Joe and I want to
That's
start a
an
program,
anatomical facility.
okay, so
Right.
let's say I want to start an anatomical facility, where are they to go to see what's approved and what's not approved, what's okay, before they waste their time going down a rabbit hole that's going to give them a no, versus I see exactly what's detailed, what needs to be done. These are the descriptions, these are the legal recommendations that must be met for me to even think about applying. So if I can't look here, am I looking at the statutes? Am I looking at the commission code? Where am I looking to find that out? And what do we list here if we're not going to list anything? So someone knows what to follow. Or if a prosecutor wants to look at someone and say, you're not an approved site because right here it says you're not, or you're not listed as an approved. So that's what I want to know on how we recommend to the commission on where you want to go with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Dr. Ali, and I have the same question. I think historically, this paragraph was equally important to the approved categories. It doesn't mean we can't change it, but one of the ones that was what that paragraph says is that basically groups that aren't related to medical or that are undergraduate are not allowed to do this. They're not approved, and so that has come up in the past with the SAB. This group may wish to change those regulations, but ultimately, I think it's important to have general categories where there's really no reason that you would, well, in my opinion, there's really no reason that you would have a cadaver in I don't know, a college that doesn't have a medical focus or whatnot. It creates the opportunity for the kind of the, pardon the expression, the gawking, just curiosity of I want to see a dead body. And so I think a lot of these things were put in there to say the reasonable use of a cadaver is in these categories of facilities, but they're not appropriate for non-medical or perhaps just general academic undergraduate campuses.
So what I'm thinking and listening to Dr. Gilbert is licensing staff. They would see the approved categories. Okay. And they're pretty expressed here, right? What those approved categories are. Okay. And if licensing staff would not see that you're part of one of these approved categories, it's highly likely, because there'll probably be a process where if you do get disapproved, you'll maybe I'll see your application on my desk as the executive director. If I agree with licensing, there is a process where the applicant can contest the decision of the commission, and that will come before all the commissioners. So, is pretty expressed, okay? Accredited chiropractor schools and colleges, schools of allied health sciences, health professions, health science centers. I don't see how any of those would, and some would help me, how any of those someone would stretch and say, well, undergraduate school. Well, undergraduate school of what?
Well, and I guess that's where, because I know there are some junior colleges that have a nursing program or might have like a pre-med. And so I don't think you need across the board cutouts.
Disapprove.
Correct. And so, I mean, I understand Dr. Gilbert's point about medically related. That's good. And I agree with that, but I don't think we need to have an across the board, like this specific school is disapproved. Maybe a way to define that, if you don't meet certain qualifications, then you're not considered an anatomical facility or a non-transplant or a well-body program. Because what if like I know Tyler Junior College has a big nursing program, and
Big Preview and has a pre-med program that feeds into the TAMU system.
And it feeds into, and for Tyler Junior College, it feeds into the big two hospitals or all of East Texas. And so, what if they may not receive direct donations, have a well body program, but they may be considered the anatomical facility where they want maybe they use parts of an arm to help them train with injuries or how to inject or, I don't know, because I don't know what nursing students do, but I think it's just, I would be cautious of automatically eliminating someone just because they're an undergrad or they're not in your traditional sense. Again, just trying to make sure we keep options open for maybe the more rural areas or more where it's not the easiest access to state-of-the-art facilities that you may have in some of your bigger cities.
So
Sarah, it seems like that paragraph though clarifies that it's undergraduate programs that are not medically related. So I understand the perspective of maybe it's redundant and too restrictive, but I think it adds clarity. So that's my perspective.
Right, and I think, you know, whether we add or other organizations that are approved, that way you can almost take all the disapproved out, right? Here are the things we're okay with, and have that one line at the end saying, or any other organization that's approved by the commission, right? So that gives us that leeway, or do you not like that type of language?
We can continue to talk about that. I guess I tend to be a different type if I want to call myself this a regulator. I'm kind of skeptical of a whole lot of free play among people making balls and strikes calls as regulators. Okay, well, I mean, that's what we do, right? But when you get to or any other, when it's James White, it's this. Okay, when it's executive director so-and-so, it may be this. And to what extent do we have confusion? So I'm always skeptical when even in the position I'm in where I see you give an agency or any other, okay, and that seems like you really just open up that canyon to be really wide or too restrictively narrow.
Okay.
So so I'm not contradicting myself, but I am skeptical of just saying or any other.
I think you could condition that on, that meets the qualifications of chapter 691 of the Texas Health and Safety Code and agency rule. So that it doesn't just open it up to everyone, but it does kind of give that leeway of, again, health and science develop at such a quick pace, and government can move kind of slow. In some ways, that's very good, but what if it is a great education format that we can't envision right now, but maybe in 10 years? I don't know.
And in that disapproved paragraph, what is paramedical? I want to make sure I'm thinking
Like
it is what it
paramedics.
is. Hmm?
They're like paramedics.
Mhm.
Okay. So why wouldn't, or am I reading that correctly? If this was to hold as the language, we would not approve a paramedical school.
Dr. Gilbert, do you have any context on that? I think you're muted.
First time on Zoom, sorry.
That's okay.
Not authorized by the commission to include any undergraduate school, colleges, or programs in non-medical dental fields, paramedics, or colleges not affiliated. So I think it's kind of maybe the problem with this is kind of the way it's written, in the sense of I see it as if you are in a medical, dental, or paramedical school, you would be considered, but that you wouldn't be if it's an undergraduate program that's not related to a medical or paramedical.
Yeah, but that's not the way it reads. It reads above colleges and non-medical dental fields, paramedical schools or colleges not affiliated. It makes it sound like paramedical schools are not, but I just want to understand, I've never heard the line paramedical school.
Yeah, I understand the discussion we're having, and I think it's important. There needs to be some clarity here for the reasons Dr. Ali indicated. I mean, somebody needs to be able to look and say, are we in the right category to do this or not? I think the goal of this, let's step back, and the goal of this is to make sure that we just don't have cadaver labs in non-medical undergraduate campuses for the sake of the wow factor or whatever. I think if there's a need for it, for instance, mortuary science is one undergraduate programs that's really approved. I think part of this is that, and the speculation, I can speak for John on this, is that, and I've seen undergraduate students that they just don't have the maturity general academic students, first year freshmen, some of them don't have the maturity to come into a lab and conduct themselves professionally. And so I think this doesn't mean that undergraduate students can't see the facility or see the cadavers. We currently have an undergraduate course going on, but this just simply means that the undergraduate can't house the cadaver and run the lab. So I don't know, maybe this is getting more convoluted than it needs to be.
To say, we separate, you're talking about age, maturity, and undergraduate programs. Why do we separate out the funeral service schools that are undergraduate programs and allow them, when I would see like EMTs, things like that, would have a bigger need for cadavers than like a funeral school? If we're gonna, I was 17 when I started mortuary school, so why are we making that difference, and why are we thinking about age?
So if I can throw something out there, and I may have a little understanding where Dr. Gilbert's going with this, I don't consider age as a reason why someone shouldn't be able to be around a cadaver. I consider more the facility or the spot, right? The actual real estate you're sitting on, right? So where Dr. Gilbert may be concerned about is, okay, every single college out there now is just going to start asking for a body or two because they think it's cool. They can set it up at their university. It's not really the right place. It's not secure. It doesn't meet all the standards and all those kind of things. And so to me, it's more the place it goes. Now, if you're at an approved site, right, and that's where I get to what is an approved authorized institution that can receive and hold bodies or dissect bodies. So if a university has no medical school at all in it or anything medical related, no nursing school, no dental, but has set up a lab that meets every single requirement, and they have a human anatomy and physiology class, because I had human anatomy and physiology at A&M, but we didn't see a body. Why could that undergraduate not have a cadaver now there if they meet all the standards?
And to your point, Mr. Chairman, I think that gets you, when we get to that point, when we get there, that gets you back to section 479.2 on the application and inspection of facilities. Okay. And I think you're bringing up a good point. This is this looks like it's a very marginalized discussion, but it's extremely important. As Ms. Hartsfield has indicated, I can see situations where Angelina Community College would probably build. It's a junior college in East Texas. Appropriate and build an anatomical facility because for the express purpose that they have doctors in their area that may need access to it. So they probably won't maybe not fit in the maybe the approved category, maybe.
I have a question.
Okay, understood. So I think this is a very thoughtful discussion that we're having, and I think to your point, that gets us to 479.2.
And right, so we have a question from the public.
It's on the screen.
Correct.
Are
Looks
they
like
able to speak?
let's see, I think it's Mark that's put a comment out there from the public regarding continuing medical education and industry sponsored skills labs for purposes of certification and training. Has a concern surrounding the need for non-lab settings such as hotel conference rooms being utilized surface specifically with respect to geographies without access to local labs. Process of inspection permitting for one-time use and the impact of access to medical education in our rural communities would be negatively impacted. Mark, do you want to discuss a little bit more what you're talking about there?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to ask a question. I am in industry, and just as we've heard that specifically with some of the changes that happened in 2023 to access to, or at least the permitting and requirements for bioskills labs, the concern is that in industry now for medical education purposes, certification, we are doing one-off labs in areas throughout the state of Texas, in hotel rooms, other areas as such. These are typically or always for us handled with a third party group that provides the tissue, prepares the area. We conduct our training, and then they facilitate cleanup, removal, and return of the specimen. And some of the concern from industry is that should we need to go through the inspection process, permitting, I know there's airflow tests and so forth, and then of course time, it would possibly and foreseeably negatively impact the ability for us to be able to do these trainings outside of areas where we have lab environments.
Right. No, I appreciate you bringing that up, Mark, and that this discussion has definitely been towards the top of the top three things that we're discussing. It's come up multiple times, and how to take care of our rural neighbors that don't have a anatomical facility close by that is approved by the commission, or a medical school close by, or a university that is approved also. So it does make it difficult for groups that don't have that type of facility close by. The issue that I see personally myself is we have to put the donor first, and we have to put the person who's donated their body science first. And if that can't be met, if it's a hotel ballroom that does not have any security to it, that has windows where you have line of sight from the public, that someone could take a picture, those kind of things, then it's not going to work. I mean, following all the rules, none of that would be met. Now, we have looked at other convention center areas and ballrooms that have been approved and looked at because they could meet all the standards that are set, right? So the concept is not to make it difficult for anybody, whether you're rural or, I mean, these conventions happen in Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, so in the big cities too. So it's not a rural thing. It's a respect for the donor and doing it right and following the rules and laws of Texas. So I've had multiple, people ask me about this exact topic, and I say, from my perspective, happy to do it at any facility that meets the requirements, right? And if you can't meet the requirements, then that's not a facility you should be doing it at, right? And so those are things that we're going to look at, and how we get to that point. I know there's some back and forth arguing about what should be allowed and what should not ever be allowed. And those are discussions we're going to have today about that. So Mark, I hear you, because I being a physician myself, I've been in all sorts of places doing labs, including strip centers next to nail salons. So, it's interesting some of the places where it's done. But like I said, if you can meet the requirements, and I think the air handling thing is one of the larger requirements that people say, I just can't meet that. I can't figure that out. We'll discuss that too here in a little bit.
Yeah, in a little bit.
Yeah. So, I don't know if that answered your question. I know it's being discussed is kind of my final answer in it.
Thank you, Dr. Ali.
Yes, sir. What's that?
To abuse of
Yeah, we have another a colleague that's joined here that is going to step back for just a second, and I apologize. We're going to bounce off this topic real quick, but we're going to go back to the abuse of corpse. It is
Will Durham.
Will Durham. Okay, Mr. Durham, are you on there, sir?
Yeah, I'm here now. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We sure can. Thank you for taking some time out this morning. Would you introduce yourself and we'll kind of go from there, sir?
Yeah, my name's Will Durham. I'm the criminal district attorney in Walker County, which is 2 counties up from Harris. It goes going north. It's Harris County, Montgomery County, and then Walker County. I've been the elected DA since 2019. And Shannon Edmonds with the District and County Attorneys Association here in Texas kind of looked up who has utilized this statute for criminal cases over the years. And I think we were one of the ones that had used it the most. There's a particular reason we do, and I can go into that in more detail, but we have used it several times since 2010. That's how far I went back. And that was before I got here, but I inherited some cases where we utilized the abuse of corpse statute, but we used the tampering statute that deals with corpses also. More often we use that one. So I don't know if you just want me to keep on rolling or what.
In regards to what we're discussing with non-transplant anatomical tissue, right? And educational led type of events. Look, it's very obvious when a medical school does something, that's a no-brainer, right? But if let's say a medical device rep decides to somehow procure an arm from a NATO or will body program and then hops into a hotel and starts to do a dissection there, if it's not at an approved anatomical facility and if someone from the public sees it, and then it kind of storms there, kind of rolls from there. Are rules being broken from your perspective, or is it just, hey, that's the commission's issue, that's not my issue?
Well, there might be I haven't had anything like that, just so you know. But yeah, possibly you would have some rules broken. It looks like more under 4208, which is the abuse of corpse statute in the penal code. That is a state jail felony. So that's the lowest of the felonies that exist in Texas law. I haven't used it as much. I have filed it a couple times, but frankly, I'm filing these as backup or insurance to murder cases. Because what happens where I'm located, we will catch gangs that have killed somebody primarily in the North Harris County area. And then what they do is they're trying to get rid of the body, and they start driving north on 45, and they have continual urban and congestion all the way to get up to Walker County, and then the pine trees and the rolling hills hit. And I mean, there's a road they pull off on regularly, and we've had several body dumps there, and we found bodies in different levels of decomposition, and then we've had to try to figure out who it is. We've used experts at Texas State and San Marcos, and Sam Houston, of course, has a body form. So we've used that to identify them. And then we've charged them primarily with tampering with a corpse, which is a second-degree felony, which is 20 years in prison. And we use that as a backup to the murder case. Most of the time, the murder has occurred in Houston, not in Walker County. I can still take a murder in Walker County. And in fact, we've had several, but it's multiple parties that are involved in it. It's usually gang related. And so we might have a good case on some of them and not as much proof on others. And so this is the backup. And we have pled people a couple of times to tampering and to abuse of a corpse, because we just didn't have the evidence to get that person for murder, but we knew they were there when the body was burned. We've had bodies that have been buried. We had one that was decapitated, probably from animals. And we have a current one right now that's pending that I obviously can't talk about. But it's a very effective tool for plea bargaining if I don't have enough, so that the guy doesn't get away with it. But that's all I've done so far. But I was just looking at the language in the abuse of corpse statute, and yeah, you could definitely have cases where if somebody went rogue, a doctor or somebody in some type of research that would come into play.
Well, I've got one question for you, sir, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
If someone has gone through the consent process and donated their bodies to a willed body program, and then that happens, the body comes in, the body is used in a dissection, but then a family member says, hey, that person wasn't of sound mind and that shouldn't have been done. We want to sue the university. We want to sue the NATO. We think it's abuse of corpse now because of it. Is there any possibility of anything like that happening where people start to say, well, we didn't want him to do that, but I know he wanted to do that, and going back and forth of that sort?
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to go. I mean, it looks like to me you're still going to have to prove, they intentionally and knowingly did something. So we'd have to really look at what proof we had on that. It's a possibility. It's going to be fact specific always on that. So I don't really have a perfect answer on it. Every case is different, but you could have a scenario where there could be a criminal law broken in that situation. It's possible.
Mr. Walker, did you have the chance to review the Texas Administrative Code Rule 479.5 about how the Because again, we received the anatomical board last September, and so we're currently operating under their rules, and this is the rule they had in place of what constituted abuse of corpse or what activities were authorized and accepted under prosecution under 42.08. So just from, and I understand like most of yours has been in the gang related context, not necessarily medical, but just in thinking of that, I guess in that context, and I know you've got Sam Houston up there, so just any of your interactions with them or conversations, is there anything about this rule from a legal perspective or prosecutor perspective that you think could be either needs to be changed or clarified or removed, just kind of strengthened, any of that?
You directing that at me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I mean, I just noticed, the part of 4208 that talks about they committed offense if without legal authority. I haven't looked at what the without legal authority is referring to. So I would think you would need a very clear definitions of what legal authority is so that it's not up for grabs and subjective. You'd want to be very clear. This is what you can legally use the courts for. And that may be somewhere else, but it doesn't look like it's in this penal code statute.
No, that sounds good. I think that's kind of been the consistent message. Do you, and so I believe, well, there's a rule, the 479.05, because that kind of helps to identify some things. Do you have any recommendation of what would help with clarifying what legal authority would entail?
Well, I mean, you could sometimes they make a laundry list of all different possibilities. And I don't know if that exists already or not. It does, it's not on the statute, but it may be somewhere else. Do y'all know?
And that's the rule that the anatomical board is had kind of drafted, and that's what we're starting with, is that laundry list and seeing if that needs to be changed or added to. And that's in the Texas Administrative Code,
Okay.
Title 25, Rule 479.5.
That's not one I get into very much.
Yeah, no, you're good. And it is a nuanced area, but we're trying to be forward thinking, just seeing if there's anything we should be considering. But if
Yeah, I can certainly look at it as well. I feel like our use of this statute will be more for body dumps, but there could be a fact pattern and it may be more in the city, but than in a smaller county like I'm in, where it could come into effect, and you'd have to look and see if this person had quote legal authority and how that's defined.
right, okay. I think that's all the questions I had. So.
Yeah, I didn't have any other questions. Anybody on the board or anybody have any questions for Mr. Durham?
All right, y'all let me know if I can help in any other way. I appreciate y'all having me.
Thank you very much for coming online. We
Okay.
appreciate you.
Thank y'all.
Have a great day. Okay, I know we bounced around real quick, back to Mr. Durham, but we wanted to do that as he was able to join us there at 10:30. We were discussing the approved, let's just get through 47.91 first.
Okay.
Are we taking those recommendations? Or are we going to delete something out here?
Well, I would throw out a suggestion, okay? Sometimes when you walk out and get a drink of water, sometimes. If legal counsel can work with Dr. Gilbert, and on that 479.1B, maybe there is language that says the commission may not approve any facility that, and I'm paraphrasing, just throwing words around, any may not authorize any facility or entity that does not have a clear nexus with medical research, science, et cetera, okay? And just leave it at that.
So that would rule out all hotel ballrooms and
Well,
convention centers.
that's when you get,
But
that's
I think
when you
that's
get.
that nexus, because if the hotel bar
That's
is
when you get down
connected with an
47.
event.
So I guess I'm saying is, if if, and my licensing supervisor is in the building here with us, in the room here. If she gets an application in front of her, okay, and it's, it's an entity, and I'm just thinking, you're looking at the application, okay, and, that supervisor, Ms. Haynes, just doesn't see any type of connection to medical science, medical research, scientific research. It's some guy in some part of Texas, I'm not gonna name any part of Texas and get anybody mad at me, but some part of Texas, and there's no connection with any medical school, no connection with any research facility. You know, the commission could look at that and just say, and that's what we should be doing. We should be looking at situations that just don't look right, okay? And saying either that entity needs to provide us more information. That's probably what one of my licensing specialists would do, would say, hey, I think I need more information. I'm looking at this. I don't feel good about this, okay? And if that just isn't there, okay, then we would, in the office, would have grounds to not approve.
Yeah, I guess where, and this goes back.
Now, if going back to the hotel convention center, if it's someone that says, I'm gonna, you know, I'm gonna do this at a convention center, we're gonna likely look up and see where that convention center is. We're likely gonna see if they're actually even scheduled to be there. Okay.
Sure.
Well,
like Mr. Freeze, Mark, I don't want to mispronounce your last name, Mark. Is it Freeze?
It is, yes, sir.
If have a small meeting at a hotel out in Galveston, right?
Okay.
And he's got 20 physicians showing up.
yes.
He's not a medical school. He's not related to any research.
Well, that's when you get into the anatomical facility phase, right?
Okay.
Okay, and we have those, yes, okay.
That's fine, because
Right.
if we're just talking about authorized to receive and hold bodies right now at the beginning, but it's gonna roll into
Right.
that next part,
Yes,
right? So
but I will tell you, we've received applications in the office and we look. Maybe there's not enough context there. I get on the phone and ask. Okay, that's what we should do in the office. Hey, I don't think I have enough information here. They say they're gonna do something over here at such and such place. I don't know how they're disposing of the deceit. So we get on the phone and ask. And obviously, if questions aren't responded to appropriately according to the rule, we have grounds to disapprove. That's what we do. Okay. Now, we're not looking to just show up in the morning and just put big red X on everybody's application. So I think, you know, if maybe council and Dr. Gilbert could get back into it, because I think we've read some things and kind of said, well, paramedic, well, if it's connected here, it looked like we could see a scenario where a paramedic program would benefit from having a cadaver or specimens. So maybe if there's a scenario there that says, hey, commission, staff, if there's just no nexus, if there's nothing there, and you're working with the application, there's just nothing there, you have the grounds to say no.
I would also offer to maybe just tighten the language on subparagraph A, because there are some I was going back to look at the definition, in state statute for will body program. It just means a program operated at an institution of higher education in the state that allows a living individual to donate to the individual's body. So there's no separation between like a medical school versus an undergrad. And as we know, most of our will body, so just maybe if we just need to rephrase to make it consistent with new statute.
Yeah, and to the extent that we want to provide staff in the office daily direction on, if you see this, do not, okay, do not approve, then, you know, we can have that addressed in B.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
There can also be a policy within the office.
Right.
That helps identify
Yeah.
more.
Yeah, well, and there'll be.
It's not on this.
That's right, and that happens in the office now, you
Right.
know, staff will walk in and say, hey, the rule says this, got it. I'm looking at this, okay?
One other question. in some of these areas, even the small areas, some of these, I don't know what the physicians do, but in lieu of using places like ballrooms, you know, where food is also served. I think, what about private autopsy facilities that are already accountable to the medical board and owned by a doctor? And, or preparation rooms that already have the correct ventilation and the protocols in place for airborne pathogens, bloodborne pathogens, etc.
What happens mostly
have
at
to
those
partner.
places, they're very small and hard to use and trying to get through the red tape of saying, hey, we'd like to use that 3 Saturdays from now is almost impossible. It just gets really difficult. It's tough enough to get it at places that are approved for it already. So those places tend not to work well.
And Commissioner, if, you know, I'm probably not gonna be here with you much longer, but you know, sometimes in these scenarios, in my business in politics and government, we really get focused on this over here, okay? Probably for some reasons. But we're missing something over here, and I think you're gonna see that later on in this. According to the current state anatomical board rules, which we are enforcing now until Dr. Ali and his colleagues get you some drafts that they have checked off on, and you and your colleagues promulgate, and we send up to the registrars for, you know, further review and into the governor's office. Under the current state anatomical board rules, there is no express prohibition against a location or place that's a hotel or, well, you know, a hotel or convention center. And so I've impressed on my friends, and I think I've had this discussion with some of my new friends that are on the screen there. We have not disapproved under the current board rules a convention center or hotel center. Kyle Bass, myself, and Jewel, they have went out to the locations. They have looked for the appropriate ventilation requirements that are already in the rules now. They have looked for security requirements in place. So as of now, I'm not saying we won't do it soon if they're not right, okay? And we will disapprove them. We under the current rule, there is nothing in there that says State Anatomical Board shall not approve a convention center. Okay, so and the commission working for you day to day, we have not disapproved any entity that has used these facilities. Okay, and so I think it's important to know that for everybody to know that we're enforcing the SAB rules now, and the SAB rules now have never, well, I said have never. The current rules do not prohibit these locations.
Okay, do we want any further discussion 479.1 on A and B?
No, I'll just add that I've heard the discussion, and I'll be glad to work with Sarah if that's what is needed to try to find a reasonable solution. So glad to be a part of that.
Hey, thanks a lot, Doc.
Excellent. If there's not any further discussion on the institutions authorized to receive and hold bodies, then we'll move on to 479.2 on application inspection of facilities, which I think we'll have a lively discussion.
Oh, yeah. So let's get after it.
Not much was changed, but comments were made as to those sections. In subsection A,
Yes. So again, thinking about the office, okay. If a will body program or NATO, and we understand, I think I would understand a facility undergoing significant alterations, why they would need to resubmit an application. I guess going forward, because I understand, I may not always be the guy that was sitting in the room with you and Dr. Gilbert and Dr. Hubbard and Bethany and understanding your intent. Okay, I may be 2 or 3 executive director iterations down. What would be a significant alteration? What if the facility is saying, I'm adding a dining facility on the other side of where the, is that a significant alteration? I'm adding another lab.
Yeah.
Maybe that's, I don't know.
Well, I would consider that if you're adding anything that has to do where the specimen's being held, used, or
Yeah.
dissected, that's
Okay.
where all the rules of inspection fall into, right? We,
The stored. Where they're stored as well.
right, so, you know, in our facility, we doubled the size of the lab space, we
Mhm.
changed where the storage was, we changed
Okay,
where the procurement
storage.
was. All those things,
Okay.
and all those things included ventilation, included security, included, you know, no windows, people can't see, those kind of things were all inspected, so the SAB did come
Mhm.
and did re-inspect us a second time around at our facility.
Okay.
That would I consider that significant change. Now, if I had added another lounge for people to sit and have breakfast in,
Okay.
that's
So-
not where the bodies are stored, that's not where they're dissected, that's not where they're used, is where I'm thinking of significant alteration.
So we're listening to your intent and so Maria standing there, she finds out, oh, such and such and such. They're in the break room. Yeah, maybe
I have a
we
question.
don't come out and take a.
Oh,
Okay.
yes, sorry.
So your intent is areas such as storage, where the sedents are being accepted or you know,
Right.
okay.
It has to be direct with the donors, right?
I mean-
Where they're received, where they're held, where they're used.
And I thought that was your intent, but when I said, I saw significant alteration.
Well,
Really?
maybe it should have that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking we could define it in a way, because assuming we're gonna keep this, because the numbers are all gonna change because we're moving it to our rules, but the standards for facilities that we're operating under now, the 479.3, I think you could define it as a significant change constitutes anything that would affect or impact the facility requirements set forth in rule such and such. And that way, we understand a significant change is anything that changed from this last inspection and would cover where the cadavers are anatomical, and I could add that to the definition of where cadavers or anatomical specimen are handled, used, stored, prepared, embalmed, whatever, however you want to phrase that.
Correct. That's what I would think. of
Okay,
significant
so
change.
we'll-
Yes.
we'll tighten that up.
Find that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, I don't know, do your colleagues have any input on that?
On subsection A. No comments, okay.
I have a quick comment, or actually I have a quick question. Under significant alterations, etc. Must be re-inspected. Would it be necessary to notify the commission ahead of time? These are the changes that are gonna be made. To make
I
sure
would-
they're approved, or are we saying make your changes and then we're not gonna approve them?
It could be more
Yeah.
efficient, or at least a heads up.
Especially if they're gonna be dropping thousands or hundreds of
Millions,
thousands. And I think, I mean, from those of y'all who already operate in this, when you do look at changes, I mean, you're already kind of looking, I'm assuming, at whether they're meeting they were meeting the former SAB facility requirements?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Yes.
we went through a significant renovation at our
Mhm.
place, but we did not submit our architectural paperwork first to the state
Right.
anatomical board, but
I
we knew.
think that's what I'm asking, Dr. Ali.
Yeah, listen, I think anybody who's already been inspected knows the rules and requirements, and so just because you submit your architectural design to the committee, that's not
I
gonna
think that's
do
giving
any,
too much
that's, yeah.
control.
I think that's what I'm trying to get to is,
Yeah.
I think that's over the top. I think what needs to be done is, if you're gonna do significant renovation, the onus is on you to know that it needs to meet the requirements.
Well, and maybe,
Right.
does there need to, like, if they're letting someone know and it's affecting their current ability to operate, maybe there be something in place where the commission will issue a hold, or like, not a hold, but like, let's just say they're having to shut down their whole facility while they're renovating. Okay, even though they're authorized, we may need to have like a, I don't know what the proper term is, like, temporary, I don't want to say suspension because that makes it look bad, but just, we could come up with a word, I
Well, if they're
guess.
not using the facility or they're not, why even put them on a pause or a hold or anything?
Well, because I guess it depends on how long, what if the authorization is good for 3 years and in the middle of that 3 years is when you close to work on the construction?
Well, I think maybe Dr. Gilbert has a point, but
Okay.
when we come out eventually,
Mhm.
okay, when we come out and inspect and we approve you, you know, the commission, we have this disclaimer on every application. It's probably in Rule 2. We don't refund, okay? So in the middle of your licensure period, if you just decide, you know, I'm gonna go to a voluntarily, I'm gonna put things on a pause and I'm going to add more lab space. That entrepreneur has made a conscious decision that I'm in the middle of my licensure period. I'm gonna lose some time here, but you know, it's more important for me to do this. Okay, I think Dr. Gilbert may have something.
Well, all good discussion. I think the intent here would be to say that, you know, I just added on 4 different rooms to my facility. And because I was already inspected and approved, then these new facilities or the new additions are inspected and approved. I think the gist here is to say that, you know, just like with my program's accreditation, a substantive change to the curriculum has to be approved by the accrediting agency. It's a similar nature. And I think it is protective to the agency or the group that's wanting to be inspected. It helps them to recognize that they're not going to drop a ton of money. So the past structure in the SAB was if you were going to renovate or change your space, then it was important to let the SAB know and the group look at the plans and say, yeah, this makes sense. And we've covered our bases and we're working collaboratively to make sure we get to the end and it's a go. So I maybe we put something in that say it is recommended that these plans be discussed or submitted to the commission for whatever. I don't know, just a thought.
Okay, yeah, it's a bear. It's a bear. Are you about out?
Yeah, he's saying about to die.
Okay, so in past practice, Doc, you said that if one of your authorized facilities is making a renovation that we should know about, they would probably just call up and say, hey, we're about to do this.
Yeah, so if it was a substantial thing, moving walls, changing the functional space of the anatomy lab, what the SAB requested was to see those plans and approve them so that at the end of it, we have something functional that can be approved. You know, I agree with your comment that if it's a bathroom or it's something that's not related to the anatomical space, then maybe that's not critical, but I don't expect anybody to, in 3 years, build a facility that doubles their space and assumes that they're grandfathered in because their other space was approved already. But that could happen. But I just think it's good communication. I would couch it this way: the commission should want to partner with groups to make sure everything's done right the first time instead of wanting to have to circle back around and fix it.
So, we've taken Dr. Gilbert's analysis. You guys will provide recommendations to the commission.
Yes.
On the standards inspections of these facilities, okay? Upon approval of the commissioners, those rules are promulgated and those are the rules we operate under. If I'm doing renovations, I'm probably with my legal staff. I'm probably going to the rules and the statutes, okay? And so, taking what Dr. Gilbert says, of course, if we got a call from Med to Market and say, hey, we just want to let you know we're expanding, we're doing this and we're doing that. My inspectors and licensing staff or if I'm on the phone, will redirect you to that. And we trust that with your knowledge of the rules, advice of your legal counsel, this is what we're coming out to look at. Okay, so yes, we like that collaboration with our folks, that we learn through collaboration. But at the end of the day, we're just gonna say, you know, we get into this discussion about, well, I'm gonna have the air ventilation over here. I don't know if it's gonna be actually what it's in the rule. We're gonna say, this is our rule, okay?
Yeah.
Your attorneys are telling you something else, maybe we get into another scenario, okay? But we're gonna stick to the rule.
It's fair
I mean,
enough.
we could also just see like with, because I think the pharmacy board issues new establishment license and then also it's either dishes or HHSC that does the hospitals.
Mhm.
And so maybe I
You
could
can take
also
a
reach
look at
out to
that.
just see like if they have any.
There's usually plans for an architect, and
Right.
architects always look at rules and
Rules
regulations.
and regulations.
Yeah,
Right.
before some- I'm sure.
Mhm.
right.
So we wouldn't hang up the phone on you. Okay, we would listen to you, and we would
That's
take
good.
you back to the.
Your audio went out. If you guys are,
And then the fire marshal will show up.
Hold on, is our audio on now overhead? Because my computer's just about to die. Yep.
Is he ready to come in?
And then let's try.
Maria, is he ready to come in? He may be right out there. We could, Mr. Chairman, we may be in a position to take a 5 to 10 minute break. And the technician
Let's do
that we
that.
call can come in and get our sound system working from the,
Yes,
from
sir.
the booth there.
Okay.
Okay?
We're gonna take a 5 to 10 minute technical break here. Okay, so everybody
Let's say
use the bathroom if you need to. We'll get, yeah, let's say 10 exactly. So it's 11 o'clock right now, 11:10.
Okay, 11:10.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anatomical advisory.
Say it again.
We're going to resume our meeting here for the State Anatomical Advisory Committee. Thank you for that little break, and I think we've got everything figured out technically. Yes, sir. Oh, real quick, since we have to take a break and come back, we need everybody's faces that are committee members, please, to continue our quorum. There's Mrs. Bright. Thank you, Dr. Gilbert, sir. If you could flash your pretty smile up there, we appreciate it. And Professor Mina, thank you. We see you. Can you guys all hear and see everything okay now? Okay, fantastic.
Okay, we have
Dr.
to
Gilbert, let me know when you're back since you'll be our quorum.
Lepaski.
Commissioner Lepowski's there.
Put us there.
Okay.
Okay.
Commissioner
Well-
Gibbs here.
Once we see their video.
Okay.
He's connecting. Are we at 11:15?
It's close to 11:15. Yes, sir.
Okay.
And
It's
then
usually, it's about 11:13. It's usually on these, when we do these breaks, it's usually a little slow. Technical reasons. Professor Lepaski, if we could, see your live video. Okay, there you are. Okay.
we have a
Okay.
quorum.
Okay, we have a quorum. So you want to just, briefly just get us going? and-
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So we were discussing, the application inspection process, significant alterations. We'll make some.
We'll get that qualified.
Yes,
I expect, Attorney Hartsville will work with, you and Dr. Hubbard on qualifying that. So that gives good direction to the staff and to the authorized entities on what we mean by significant
alterations, correct.
Okay?
Yes, sir. And as we go down, requirements for being inspected and how often you should be inspected. If you're a new facility, if you've undergone major renovations, we have in blue here, will be inspected by a minimum of 2 members. I know there was something that you had an issue with.
I just want to know why 2, and this is the reason why. I see a scenario where I would send 2 inspectors. I see a scenario where I would send 1 inspector. So if it's 1 doctor's clinic, okay, probably the size of 2 of these rooms, maybe that's 1 inspector, okay? If it is a huge facility, okay, for efficiency reasons, I may send 2. I was just wondering why would the direction to have 2?
I don't have a problem with 1 or more
Okay,
being the wording, but I know the state anatomical board prior to.
or
made
just
a-
tell us to go inspect.
Yeah, just go inspect.
Tell us to go inspect.
Right, 1 or more inspectors will show up to inspect.
Yes.
I'm just making sure, Dr. Gilbert, did you have any comment?
With the regard to the the 2 inspectors, I think that's what traditionally it's been. In part, I think that was to create, how can I put this? To create some duality of responsibility, so it didn't fall to one person's opinion or whatever, that there was some kind of support for both people looking at things. Some people are going to notice security more than they might notice something different. So I think that's the traditional perspective, that it supported the board. The board felt like it was doing due diligence if there was more than 1 person. Granted, there's the scope of what has to be done has changed quite a bit in the last few years. So I understand the question. But I think it was really there to take the pressure off of 1 specific person to say yes or no.
If in rule, we do have, if inspector comes back and is disapproved, even in rule now, there's a certain period of time that facility can correct those deficiencies. But even in rule, there will be a process where if we do get to that point, it gets to the executive director's desk, and if need be, eventually to the commissioners.
Well, and then I think SOA would ultimately apply.
Well,
too. So
that'll be
there's
in the
already a
mix too.
built-in remedy process, but we can address that when we get there.
Okay.
And
I
then,
think for the, I'm sorry, Ms. Wright, I believe you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering what the standard is for the funeral home inspections when the commission inspects their facilities. Do they send 1 or 2? And also, maybe that's something we can reference with the major changes. What's the commission standards for the funeral homes if they have any major renovations?
I agree.
Usually it's 1, if there's training going on. You know, my chief inspector Kyle, if there's training going, he may, for several weeks, he may go out with that new inspector. Okay. But usually the inspectors are working solo throughout the state.
and to credit our inspectors right now, like they're working with anatomical board members, and then also some other individuals who are in this industry, because they're wanting to learn. They're asking a lot of questions. They've toured several facilities already, just kind of getting an idea of what to look for. And so, I think we'll still, I'm not trying to speak on behalf of the commission, but my guess is we'll probably still kind of do that in the early stages to continue to make sure that they're trained so that when they do go out on their own, you know, they're going to be well trained.
Yes.
Yeah, and one of the things that may be a difference between the state anatomical board beforehand and now is the state anatomical board did not have full-time employees that were inspectors only. They were the professors, Dr. Gilbert, Dr. Hubbard, who would actually take of their time, fly out to areas and do these inspections, which is kind of like sending your general out to the front lines. Whereas in this new world that we have,
Right. Okay.
we're going to have full-time inspectors. That's all they do, and they should be experts at it. And as they get trained,
Eventually.
as they get trained to that expertise level, then they should be able to do this on their own by themselves. Or if larger facility need to, that's something the commission can decide. But having 1 or more seems to take care of all that for us.
And then I think in regards to the second part of your question of like when like funeral establishments need to renew or do a license, I think it's change of ownership 1, and then change of location. I mean, we can consider that, but it's very nuanced to the funeral industry. So unfortunately, I don't think there's a lot we can carry over, but what we can definitely look into that.
So now that we've got the inspector part done, if there's no other comments.
Yeah, no
regarding
other
the
comments.
inspector-
I see two chats, so we probably already,
Yeah, those are all chat.
okay.
We'll go on to if you have been cited for a deficiency or you're not approved. The comment has been made about, let's make sure this is consistent
Yeah.
with state statute
Mhm.
or existing agency rules regarding applicant due process. So you're told, no, you're not approved. Right now, we've said we have, the reinspection will happen in 60 days
Mhm.
or whenever the applying organization decides they've corrected that action.
And I see going forward, as, you know, especially as we get beyond 1 September 2024, I think any executive director in this situation would have a problem with their commissioners of the Funeral Service Commission if it took us 60 days to go out and inspect something. So, I see that. I see that probably going away 60 days. I mean, if we have this program and, this is what we do and we have dedicated inspectors, it should not take us 60 days. Okay, maybe 6 days, okay?
But should there be something here for the applicant to say, you have 60 days to come to the inspection?
About 30.
Okay, well,
I think it's more from the applicant's perspective.
Yeah.
of,
Okay.
When are you gonna come back? Cause I can't start my business.
Because I think how this is being read is they can't operate until they're
Right.
re-inspected.
so what, I think this is my comment, is, and this is probably one more to Ms. Hartsville, just look at this.
Okay.
Make sure it's consistent with any state statute. And since this is coming to the TFSC, it's not clashing with any of the existing. Yes, sir.
You raise my hand, I don't get a yellow hand like everybody else. So the only clarification I would like, if I was a person applying for
Okay.
this, if I was told, no, you have a deficiency, and I agree that, yes, I have that deficiency, right? Let me correct it, and then once I've corrected it, and I resubmit that I've corrected it, I would like to know what my maximum time is before I have someone else.
And we have a process for this and it's not 60 days. Okay, so, if you want to, you can work with her. And we can look at what we do now with our.
Like, I don't wanna tell someone 7 days and get there 10 days, right? I'd like.
I
to
get it.
be
I
able to
understand,
understand it,
yeah.
right?
Well, we can also talk with our inspectors too to
See what that
would be
looks like.
Right,
reasonable.
so that's my first question. My second question is, I disagree with your deficiency. What you're telling me is deficient, I disagree with. So
Okay.
that's not, I'm gonna go get my construction guy back out here,
Okay.
my air conditioning guy. So I disagree. So what is my route when I disagree with your deficiency?
So, I would expect, now, my inspector's probably going to be talking with you, but I would expect if the inspector really thought that he or she is following the rule, they hold their position, okay? And, then they will come back here, okay? You'll probably call them before they get back here and talk to me. And, that's when, obviously, we will consult with in-house counsel to make sure we're correct. But,
I just want a due process to be on here. So if
yes,
someone
we
looks
can
at
do the
this,
due process.
if someone
okay?
looks at this and says, what's my due process? When
Okay.
someone says I have deficiency and I disagree with them, oh, Director White?
Okay, so that's consistent with what I'm saying. I want to make sure that, because if you go through some of the statute, if you go through some of the enabling legislation, the enabling legislation implies that we have a process right now with our existing licensees. And to the extent that we can, we need y'all's help and advice, obviously, to bring you into that. Okay, so that's why I put that, I understand it was only about 6 lines, but just as you're saying, I just want to make sure it's substantive enough and it's consistent. Okay, and again, if one of the reasons why we were asked to step up to this is because we have full-time staff. Okay, and it shouldn't be 60 days, 30 days, and that sort of thing.
But to go through that, like even if statute is not clear enough, I do think we can incorporate some kind of check
Yes, you
system
will.
where it's like maybe a visit with executive director and legal
What we have
counsel.
in rule
Okay,
now.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. as we move on to 3-year intervals of re-inspections.
Okay.
I didn't see any issues with that.
Okay.
You're giving notice ahead of time that, hey, you're coming up here in 3-year
Yes.
inspection. As we get into the technical side of this, of having a website up, it would be nice to show Bob's BioSkill facility is approved from 2022 to 2025. So a person coming to use that facility knows that they're going to be re-inspected in a year, but they're good to go. We've had multiple phone calls saying, well, show us proof that you're good for your next 3 years. And I don't have a place to point them.
Right. So,
For your,
so
your
I think
There's nothing in statute. There's,
Well-
for NATO's, it's once every 5 years, but
Well-
there's not.
what he's saying though, and I think it's further along, is yes, on the public verification site, online, just like we can type in San Antonio, oh, who's all good in San Antonio?
Right.
Oh, Mission Park, okay, southwest, north, central, everywhere, okay, all right. And, there will be a drop down eventually for anatomical facilities or wheel body programs or NATO's, maybe by, it can be queried up by county, by city, et cetera. So that's the public verification site. And also the commission will promulgate a certificate or a document that you can visibly, I think they used to work conspicuously in rule, that, so if I walk in as an inspector, if I walk in as a potential consumer, I can see it also. And it'll have your license.
Gotcha. Perfect. So our interval's fine. Any feedback on the interval of 3 years?
You raise it in.
Okay, pick whichever one you want first.
Dr. Ali?
Yes, Dr. Gilbert.
I think the interval of 3 years was what the state anatomical board was trying to shift to. And so the thought being that 3 years, 5 years may be a little long thing. The slow fade may occur more readily over a 5-year period than a 3-year period. So that was the justification there. Question regarding, we're at Texas Tech University Health Science Center, we're classified as a wheel body program. The question I have is that we also have connected to that, or in part of that, we have an anatomical facility. Would we be listed in 2 separate places, Mr. White, or would we be a wheel body program that includes an anatomical facility and it's all one thing?
Like half of me is wondering if it would, because of the new new statute, if it would all be a will body program because it's at a university.
So he has an anatomical facility.
No, I know,
Yeah.
Dr. Hubbard said the same thing.
Well, there's a,
Look at
there a
the
clause in there saying a NATO can't own an anatomical.
right.
So why does a wheel body program get to own an anatomical facility then? I mean, still human body and still anatomical facility. Because one's privately owned, one's university owned.
And so the definition of an anatomical, okay, again, will body program is a program operated at an institution of higher education that allows a living individual to donate the individual's body or anatomical specimen for educational research purposes. Anatomical facility is a facility inspected and approved by the commission that does not operate as a will body program or NATO. So
So does it
because the
operate-
program's operated by a university, even though under the former SAB it was separate, I don't see why that couldn't be merged as all of it being a will body program, because they are receiving and using, and it's all. But I mean, that may be where we need legislative clarification. I don't know.
Well, so that's actually an interesting discussion, and I don't want to belabor the point. I definitely don't really want to do 2 separate sets of documentation and inspections, but we'll do whatever we're asked to do. If we're going to post these things on a website, though, that tells somebody, hey, you're approved or you're not, to list this only as a will body program, that may indicate to people that we just simply receive bodies and distribute bodies, where they may not recognize us as a place where they could actually come in and produce clinical training scenarios. And so, again, that's more of a marketing issue. It's not really a legislative issue, but it's something that we may want to be mindful of how we list different groups. So just a thought.
Well, yeah.
There's certain things that can occur. There's certain activities or functions that can occur in an anatomical facility. There's certain functions activities that can occur in will body program / NATO.
On my and I could be totally missing this, how I'm guessing the legislator probably saw it as will body programs and NATOs can do everything an anatomical facility could do, except for they can directly interact with members of the public, and that's why they have
Check,
a little bit more standard. But I could be completely wrong, because I wasn't paying attention during that
Check.
sunset.
check.
Okay.
Okay, an anatomical facility is only in a position to receive tissue, do dissection, research, etc., and return. They cannot,
They'll directly.
they cannot distribute on to another. They can only return the tissue back to the NATO or the will body program, the anatomical facility.
Because until we went and visited with Dr. Hubbard, and saw the A&M Will Body program, in my mind, Will Body program was all the same thing where you receive bodies, you did the labs, you did the training, the experimentation, the dissection, and then the disposition. And then, so I didn't realize that y'all had classified them as two separate ones until that was brought to my attention. So that was why, like, I don't see a problem right now with just saying will body program, even if under the former law, if y'all had an anatomical facility, I don't see a problem with merging that, because you're still fitting it. It's a program operated at an institution of higher education, that you're allowing it, and for donations for educational research purposes. So what you're doing in your anatomical facilities, education research.
So talk to me about the tracking.
Well, that's what we're gonna have
Yeah,
to.
okay, so if, I'm just looking at this, so if I'm if I'm James White Will Body Program, I am registering and bringing in decedents,
Mhm.
okay? If I'm a dental program, there's probably certain parts of the decedent's body that are more instructional value than others, so I'm probably keeping those and distributing other parts of that decedent's body to other anatomical facilities. Okay,
Well, and I can see where too, because I know also,
with the thought I'm getting them back.
right. But then I'm also now thinking, when you mentioned the dental program, because I know like UTMB has their will buy program, but then they have 4 or 5 different approved programs. And so, Dr. Gilbert, let me ask you this: for Texas Tech, with the main anatomical facility, like, is there one main anatomical facility that you could see as connected to the will body program and then anything else that's with Texas Tech, but outside of that could be considered an anatomical facility? Like if it was the Tech dental program or the Tech med student lab over here, or I don't know.
Well, yes, I mean, we have a facility in Midland that's connected to the Midland College campus and our T2HSC campus there that's really there for the PA program. The way that the SAB viewed it was that was an extension of our will body program here. They did inspect both facilities, but we're listed as not having 3 separate facilities. It's 2 facilities, 1 will body program, if that makes sense. So I think that I agree with you, Sarah. The will body programs and NATOs are going to be the I guess the highest level of authorization to receive and use and distribute and transfer. So it was more, my comment was more of an idea of, we might consider how we list these in terms of function on the website. So, but I think we're okay as we are, and I think we're probably in the weeds too far to really be productive.
Hang on just a second.
While they're discussing, Mr. Owens, I see your hand is up. If you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for taking on this challenge. My name is Jason Owens. I'm the Executive Director for the Medical Education and Research Institute in Memphis, Tennessee. And we operate as all of those pillars is what we refer to them as. So we're a non-transplant tissue bank that's approved by AATB. So we receive, acquire, distribute anatomical material. We also have an approved facility, or anatomical facility, as you guys call it, that's a mobile bioskills lab. And one of my questions is, and we need some clarity here, is that reading this document, it says all approved facilities will be re-inspected at a minimum of 3 years. So once we had our anatomical facility that's a mobile bioskills lab approved, we were under the assumption that it's approved for 3 years. And James, we had a conversation back in November when you came and did the inspection that the facility was approved for 3 years. But we're also hearing that for every course that you put on for medical device industry, that you have to resubmit a inspection of facilities form, which seems kind of redundant in nature, in that nothing has changed on that mobile bioskills lab.
I don't, if I conveyed that, that's not what I meant to convey. That mobile lab, okay, is a anatomical facility to the extent that it's been inspected and approved. That mobile lab, and it has to be that mobile lab. If it's registration number 116,
Different vehicle.
Huh?
Or if it's a different vehicle.
it has to be that mobile lab, 116.
No, I know, but sometimes they
Then they
have
have
like
5.
3 mobile labs. So if we've only inspected one mobile lab, we have to inspect the other.
Well, let me address this point here, okay? Because I was there and we inspected his lab. Okay, so that lab was approved because it was inspected, okay? So that's 3, and it's that mobile lab, okay? Now, yes, if he wants to bring in 117, we're gonna have to take a look at 117, okay?
To
So that's the-
clarify mobile labs, are
Well,
we
could-
talking
could-
in
could I
trucks or
finish, please?
van?
Could I finish, please? Could I finish, please? So that's the mobile lab, okay? Now, if you're taking specimens off the mobile lab into another into a fixed location, maybe it's a convention center, maybe it's a standalone anatomical lab. That facility needs inspection.
But if everything stays within the mobile lab that was previously authorized and inspected, it does not need to be re-inspected. And, Ms.
3
Wright,
years.
right, for 3 years. And Ms. Wright, to address yours, a mobile lab, and that's something we'll probably need to go ahead and define and rule, but it would be like what I'm envisioning is like where the lab is on wheels, right? And just basically set up to perform everything that would happen at a brick and mortar, except for it can
Okay.
be transported.
And I think this has been a standard process for the SAD.
I think Dr. Gilbert can
Yes.
speak on.
Yeah, and you could find a mobile lab as a mobile version of what we have here in Memphis, Tennessee, which is a brick and mortar bioskills facility, which is very similar to what you have, Dr. Arlie, at your facility. It's an 18-wheel version of that. Now, that's not to be confused with what we have. It's what we call anatomical transport vehicles, which would transport cadaveric material to or to anatomical facilities. For instance, Dr. Ali, you could contact the Mary to supply your organization with 6 torsos for posterior spinal surgery, and that's how we would transport those donors to you, take them into your facility, help with setup if that's what you needed, and then Mary's policy is to bring all of the tissue back to the institution for final disposition. But that's different for all, NATOs. Some NATOs don't do that, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But that's what should just be conveyed to the donor and the donor family.
Yeah, Mr. Owens, number one, first of all, you guys run a first-class facility and program, so we appreciate you being online today. So thank you. Secondly, I hope that answers your question, that if your mobile vehicle has been approved, that's approved for 3 years. And I think Mr. White was just making it very clear that it can't pull up in the back of the convention center and start bringing things out and use the next place as their approved site.
Correct.
That site needs to be approved. I think that was pretty clear.
Mm,
Did we
yes.
answer your question, sir, or your concern?
Yeah, that's one of them. We have some other concerns just on the facility inspection checklist, just to provide clarity. The challenge is the requirements are not, to us, they're not crystal clear. And as you know, Dr. Ali, a lot of these educational programs take place at the last minute. They might call us on a Monday to do a course in Texas on a Friday. One example would be on the inspection checklist, item 7, as I call it, says no public viewing of cadavers during transport into and out of your facility. So would that mean that the donor couldn't be seen in an air tray or a covered stretcher? Would that make us fail that inspection? Because too much is on the line, as you know.
Mr. Owens, I'm so sorry. This is Sarah Hartzell. I'm gonna interject.
Sure.
We do have to stick to, because we're a public open meeting, we do have to stick to the agenda, which is more
Okay.
of the inspection rule, what our rule requirements are for inspection. So if you want to ask those questions in the context of, hey, because I think we have the rule being shared online, and we're gonna get to that one next. That's
Okay.
the standards for facilities, which is Rule 479.3. So if that is not clear in the rule, that's something we can look at when we get to that part and see how we can address and clarify that so that
Okay.
those types of questions could be answered.
Yeah,
We're
sorry
happy
about
to
that.
talk with you offline
Yeah.
to answer your individual questions.
Yeah, sorry about that. We just kind of hopping around a little bit, and I kind of lost where we were, to be honest
Yeah,
with
no worries. Thank you.
Hey, thanks a lot, Jason.
No problem.
Stay with us, please.
Will do.
Okay, we had talked about the application process. We were good with that process of how we're applying. I know it talks about search organizations here in subsection C and subsection D. I don't have any feedback on those subsections. I didn't see any comments from any of the board members on there either.
I think all that's in state statute, at least the IRS part. Now, I actually had a question, and it might be for you, Dr. Lee. So when we toured the A&M facility, I know Dr. Hubbard had mentioned how A&M, in order, I think, to pass certain health and safety inspections, that A&M itself engages in some kind of checklist, and I don't know if A&M as a college has to meet certain state and federal requirements, but it seemed to be that there was some kind of document that was provided. I think for if you're using embalmed specimen, is it a pathogen test or another test? Dr. Gilbert, do you know, do you have to do something similar?
I think, I don't know the context of the discussion. I would assume it's in one of two areas. One, it could be a university policy related to biohazard. So we have an institutional biohazard committee that has to give us a biohazard protocol that we file and update annually for our research purposes. That could be it. I think more likely it has to do with the monitoring of formaldehyde or hazardous chemicals. And that's
what it was.
Yeah, so that's part of what we do. We have formaldehyde kits that we put out in short-term and long-term application. One is 15 minutes and one is 8 hours. And those are part of the audit process and reinspection. So in fact, we just submitted our inspection request to the commission. And so we have that data for our Lubbock facility. We're in the process of getting it for the Midland facility. And so, but it had a 15-minute and an 8-hour formaldehyde test, and you send it off and get it analyzed, and it tells you how many parts per million, and the standards are listed there. So if you're under the standard, that tells you your facility is managing the fumes that come from those chemicals.
So my question is, I'm thinking from the perspective of our inspectors, if we're requiring, all facilities to meet, like, that test that was performed, do you know if that is required by local health and safety requirements, state, local and health safety, or the federal? Or is that just an institutional requirement?
Well, I mean, I just did the inspection form that's on the TFSC website and it's required, it's listed by that. I don't remember if it was required. But it was something that was listed in what we needed to submit as a request for application for inspection. So John could probably answer that more effectively. One of our Willed Body Program Director administrators could probably answer that a little better than I could, but we did supply it with our inspection request. So I think it's kind of been in use for quite a while.
Well, and Dr. Hubbard didn't know, which is why I was asking. President Lepaski, do you know, are you familiar?
Yes, the formaldehyde monitoring he's referring to, all of that goes back to OSHA requirements, the short-term exposure limit and the time-weighted average. So the numbers and the times and everything that Dr. Gilbert was referring to, all of those go back to OSHA, to federal requirements with formaldehyde.
Is there, again, because I'm just trying to think of internally as we're diving into, and I know this is more into the weeds, but is there a general document that has to be, that OSHA generates, that we could be asking for as the commission to verify that that authorized entities are satisfying the federal OSHA, health and safety OSHA requirements? And then I don't know, and then I'm gonna get to private sector, because I don't know if y'all have to do anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, all the funeral homes do. Anybody using formaldehyde that falls under OSHA's formaldehyde standard, I mean, that's a published document that they have that I know we could get our hands on to share with everybody.
Okay, yeah, if you wouldn't mind that, that would be great. But once they've done that test, and Dr. Gilbert, you might have already provided this, was there a form that you submitted to us to show that you satisfied that test? Okay, do you remember
Yes.
what the name of the form is called?
No.
That's fine, I can look at it and we'll work on that, because I may incorporate, if y'all are okay with that, I'm just helping show maybe partner rules of what to show that health and safety are met.
Yeah, when we sent the document or the test kits in, we get a report back saying that we met it and here's the OSHA standard and here's where we are and then everything's clear. So
Thank you.
you bet.
And I know the Willed Body programs tend to use the embalming technique. I know most of the NATOs, I won't say 100% of them, tend to not preserve the bodies with formaldehyde or other aldehydes or embalming processes. They tend to do fresh frozen.
Is there a separate test you're required to meet for fresh frozen, like?
Just a
hepat-
serology. We do our triple serology of hepatitis, HIV.
Okay,
You don't have to do COVID, but some groups do COVID
so
testing.
the vets don't really require
There's
anything?
no health and, it's more of a, I mean, most of the organizations we work with, like a giant med device company, tend to have their standards, or if they're doing a skills lab, the anatomical specimen must be clear of HIV and hepatitis. Those are usually the baseline ones, but there's not a OSHA or, health and.
And then I think when Dr. Hubbard had mentioned a pathogen test, does that? I don't know
Well, I
what
mean, that
pathogen is, and I don't know if.
Well, that's the blood pathogen he's talking
Okay.
about, is usually the viral, the big three,
Of what
the
she
big
just
two, the
mentioned.
hepatitis and
Okay.
HIV.
Okay. Do y'all have any, when you do that kind of thing, is there any kind of form y'all fill out or thing generates
Well,
to
it's
show that?
it's sent to a certified lab.
Okay,
Right, so it has to go to a certified lab, and then that paperwork is sent back to us, and that's shared with the client
okay.
to show that these things.
And so that's something that could be shared with the commission to show that health and safety requirements.
Yeah, I mean,
could
if
be-
someone says, please show me your
Okay.
serology for your last, 50 people, we just bring it up on the computer.
Do you think that's something that would help with our inspectors and seeing the health and safety requirements?
Well, I think that's part of the requirements of passing is to be able to, and this is what the AATB does some of too, is all the paperwork, are the coolers being kept at a certain temperature, or are they being quarantined before the serology gets back? All those things are things that we should institute too, in the sense of, is this an appropriate facility to accept? Now, an anatomical facility that's using only, right? Well, they have totally different standards. That's more the security, the storage, the use, the sight lines, those kind of things.
Okay.
That we have to separate out.
Sarah, some of that's in our case is closely evaluated in the audit process of our inspection process.
Okay.
If there's no more discussion on that particular part, I think we're at the inspection section with the inspection team, and we've already talked about that we have trained inspectors that are employed by the commission, and that one or more will go to inspect these sites. We talked about approved facilities and want to be re-inspected every 3 years as a recommendation. There's one part that is not really covered in the inspection. That's the NATOs that are in the process of AATB certification. Before those new NATOs can accept donors in that kind of that interim period, we've recommended that the commission inspect them before they receive their first body. And from my perspective, I wouldn't want an organization to start accepting donor bodies with no oversight at all from either the AATB or us before they are approved 6 months down the line or 9 months down the line.
So we can do that at a different agenda. I didn't put that on
Oh, is
this
that-
agenda.
Okay.
But I
thought that was
think
part of the inspection.
also, Miss Wright, weren't y'all working on that as part of your conditional registration rule?
Yeah, so that's something that we recommended is a prior inspection just to start that 6 months period you need with AATB before they will come and start their process.
So my guess is what we can do is focus on all these inspections and then like next agenda, we can address that one and then since we'll hopefully have all that refined, we can figure out if we want all that to apply to the conditional registration of NATOs or something different, but we have to just, unless did I
I
put?
think you put here on review and discuss revisions of rule recommendations regarding inspection requirements, and that's what we're talking about. Is inspection
Right.
You're just
But I
talking about
think Well, but
when
it's,
we inspect and the frequency of the
but it
inspection.
says on inspection requirements for wheel body programs and anatomical facilities, I don't, in Roman numeral 3. And so everything under that is in the context of wheel body programs and anatomical
Okay.
facilities.
Okay, all right, so, okay. So the NATO piece, we're gonna just catch later. Okay, got it.
But we can discuss the standards and the steps in our inspection process, right?
Right, just,
Okay.
not necessarily applying to conditional registration of NATOs until.
That's
a
it.
conditional
We'll have to
registration.
put that to next time since it's not on our public agenda.
But everything else, yes.
Okay.
I have a
If it's like-
question.
Yes, ma'am.
For the reinspection every 3 years, does that include like the hotels that are being inspected and improved? Like I know the Gaylord was approved for a specific conference. Does that only need to be inspected every 3 years as well? Or is it different since it's a more?
They have to be inspected every time they do an event.
And I think the reasoning behind that is the hotel is not hosting the BioSkills Lab, usually either the device company or the third party
Yeah.
that's coming in. So you may have third party number one come in that does an incredible job. They have everything perfectly set. And I think we did have a group come in out of Phoenix that did an incredible job. And, but then we may have a second group come into that same hotel and not set up stuff on the floors, not set up the walls that are needed and not set up the ventilation exchanges and those kind of things that we look for. So it's not truly the actual physical hotel we're looking at every single time. We obviously will look at it the first time we're there, but it's more the user of the hotel and how they're hosting the BioSkills Lab.
Yeah.
Well,
Just so I
I think we can
understand.
further
Do we-
define, 'cause I think we need to define that in rule.
Right.
Because the other thing, right now, I would see it as a, because they are doing a major renovation or a significant alteration to the hotel,
Well,
that could kind of help.
I think it's somewhere down here. I've been thinking about this. Maybe we have a section, temporary anatomical
Oh,
facilities.
no, I just meant for under current rule, that's how we're,
Okay.
but yes.
But to your point, Ms. Wright, when we see that it's a convention center, et cetera, it's every time they have to do it, they have to do a new application every time. And we're very clear that if they're approved, their approval is only for that time period on that application.
So.
Conditional
if I-
approval.
If I may ask a question, if we have an organization, that puts on these temporary type events, right? But it's the same organization, right? Let's say we have a colleague that they come in, they do a great job, we've inspected them, and they call us again, they say, hey, it's us again, we're gonna come back to that same hotel. You've already inspected me once, can I not just have a certificate that says, I'm
Yeah,
just going
that-
through the
that has-
scenario.
that has- that has
We're gonna
been-
go back to that same group that goes to the same hotel that does the same thing.
That has been brought to me. I think someone called it a floating, approval. Where we are now in our rulemaking, in our transition with the SAB, I think that's something that probably should be on a, things to be
Future agenda?
things to be looked at. There should just be things to be looked at, okay? But I don't think, we're at a point now where we can say, hey, it's gonna be the same setup every year. I show up in June and clear me, okay? Just too many, variables there, and I think the expectations of the statute, the intent of the statute is that if it's going to be that, a temporary situation, temporary means temporary, we need to go out and take a look at it. And, it's kind of different if I see a standalone brick and mortar. It's not much is going to be picking up change rooms moved around, but, going around looking at some of these temporary locations, Dr. Ali, I mean, it's a different setup. What if something happens at the site and they say, well, we just can't set it up this way, we got to move it this way with the movable wall. So I think right now it's safe for us to go out and take a look at these situations where it's the temporary scenario, okay? And we need to get comfortable with this, and we need our applicants to get comfortable with this.
Because I think, well, and I could be wrong, I haven't checked the fire requirements, but it could be too, do they, when that same facility, even though they use the same setup, do they have to get the fire inspection renewed each time, or? But
Yeah.
along with Mr. White, like another thought is if they knew that they had the authorization all the time, what if they got lazy the next time and didn't meet all the requirements because they knew we weren't gonna come out and inspect it? So I think there's still some
I
concern.
think right now, we got a pretty good tempo. And again, I do think it's something to discuss, okay? If I'm using the same setup all the time, blah, 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 blah. But, that may be something we need to get a committee and study it.
Tom, I see your hand is up, sir. Go ahead.
I just wanted to maybe ask a question or make a comment about this, and I don't see a way to turn my camera on, so I won't try.
Okay.
The comment that was just made about, what happens if we get lazy, my suggestion on that, or my addition to that, would be, unlike a licensed bioskills facility that's standalone, a service like this that was used that had some kind of floating certification or whatever. Number one, it could be not 3 years, maybe it's annually. The second thing is that service would be required to notify the TFSC every time an activity was going to be done, and would be subject to inspection at the will of the TFSC. So the lazy, because we know we weren't going to get inspected, that mitigates that, because we could be inspected at any time with or without notice. And that's something that this type of certification would be subject to. Does that make sense?
Tom,
As just as another way to kind of further provide a little more accountability and rigor to this particular
What is
issue.
the problem? What is the challenge that we're trying to solve here?
The challenge, I think, is number one, it relieves some burden of the TFSC of having to inspect every time a hotel lab is going to be done. If you have a service that you have vetted and said, these are the standards that we require, the service is agreeing to every time they will meet those standards. And if they aren't, they have the duty and responsibility to notify the TFSC and or tell the client, we can't use this space because these standards can't be met. You'll have to find another space. And so it's also not having to have so let's just say a medical device company, and they want to do 5 hotel labs or 10 hotel labs a year all around Texas. But they're going to use the same setup service in every one of those hotels, not having to have 10 inspections, essentially.
Okay.
And not having to have the TFSC send inspectors to inspect 10 different hotel setups if it's the exact same hotel
Okay.
setup every time.
So your point is the regulatory burden on the regulatory agency. Okay, is that what you're trying to solve?
I'd say that is a added benefit.
Okay.
I'd say the other burden is more on the clients of they don't have to worry about necessarily going through the entire submission process and filling out the form every time.
Okay, so could I address that? Okay, and look, I don't have a vote on this, okay? I don't have a vote on this. It'll be the committee, and then it'll be the commissioners, and then it'll be the governor's office, then it'll be this. Got it, okay? So it's the regulatory burden of filling out the application, because as of now, I do think my inspectors are looking at me kind of crazy with the workload right now. Okay, we're going through this transition. Okay, but I have not, now I may do it with the legislature. I may make an ask for additional staff, but I have not come to my commissioners and said, I just can't do this, man. It's just a whole lot. We need to do this. So I haven't seen the need to do that yet. So now we're on the application, and the application is what, 5-6 pages? If it's the same setup, 10 times a year, you could send all those applications in to me at one time. We can conditionally approve that the applications meet the guidelines, and then my inspectors come out and just make sure, well, whatever you said on the application is actually there in person.
And the more information we get up front, the more, like, if we see problems up front, we can communicate that. Like, we've already done that with some anatomical facilities who forget to include certain rule requirements.
Right.
And they're able to get to us before their lab happens in 2 days. So granted, I can't guarantee all that, but like, we're working with, so the more the good faith we have on the applicant's part of giving us information that we need, then it helps with that, resolving as many problems as possible on the front end.
Right. So, my friend Tom from up north
He's discussing, that was him that was bringing up the.
no, that was Jason, Tom.
No, that was Tom.
Oh, it was Tom.
Tom,
Okay.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, that was me.
Yes, go ahead, Tom.
Well, I was going to say, so a couple of just comments on that is a medical device company may be planning 10 events, but they may not know where those events going to be so that they could send all 10 to you at the same time. The other thing, which I think you have probably experienced some, is many times they are kind of at the whim of the schedules of the surgeons, which change frequently and without notice. And so that's kind of part of the other thing, is knowing that they still have the ability to train the surgeons when the surgeons can be trained and not have to worry about, am I going to be able to get this in and get inspected in time to get it approved so that we can move forward with the training with the surgeon.
And when we come up on those situations on the temporary, we direct the inspectors that, hey, you just got to go out and just get this one.
Well, and the other thing too is we do, and we've done this already with a couple where, if we weren't, like, if maybe the communication didn't work on their end, like, we do have a list of pre-authorized facilities, and many of them are usually in the same town. And there's been a couple scenarios already where they were able to just go ahead and use pre-authorized facilities. I'm not saying that's, like, we're not dismissing your points at all. It's just, that's one alternative in case, if that helps remove some.
Sure. I mean, the pre-authorized facility piece, the considerations that the end users would take into account would be, obviously the facility has to be available for the date and time they need. But also there's sometimes there's cost considerations. that they are looking at.
So, again, ultimately, I don't have a vote on this, Mr.
Well, I'm just looking at it from a NATO perspective, an anatomical facility perspective, and just this whole entire realm of healthcare education. I get that a decent amount of these skills labs don't happen at true, we built this structure for skills labs, right? Because they were either done at medical schools beforehand, or they were done in hotel ballrooms and convention centers, and there weren't that many anatomical facilities, and there still aren't enough to cover all the cities. So the question Tom poses of having a floating, we've been approved as a group that can come, we will always tell you where it's at. You can always come inspect every single one, or don't inspect any of it. That's up to
They'll
you.
always be at that particular hotel.
Well, let's say he lists 20 hotels for you, right? And he's
Okay.
got, here are the 20 hotels, y'all want to start inspecting them now, so they're kind of cleared off the inspection, but it doesn't matter, because
Right.
until they get there and set up, you're
Right.
not gonna know what it looks
Right,
like.
and to that point, 20 hotels, they have confirmed, if we keep this requirement, air change, okay? They have confirmed, and convention centers, hotel, they like to change stuff too, they like to get bigger and better and grander too, right? So really you got more than one moving part. Jason and Tom, their situation as far as the setup may be pretty stable. Okay, all right. So again, look, I could just.
Well,
go-
I'm not arguing one way or the other,
Yeah,
but the thing
yeah.
is, the onus is still on
Yeah,
his company.
yeah, right.
Of
I
them
can-
coming in, meeting all the requirements, and if yes, the hotel decides that they're gonna take this one movable wall down, well, did that change requirements?
Now, here's another term I hear a lot, okay? Executive Director White, everybody needs to be treated the same. I hear that a lot. Maybe somebody's online that says that to me a lot. I need to be treated the same, okay? So can, my buddy, Dr. Hubbard, can he say, hey, look, I'm really easy, James. I'm here, I'm always here. Why show up every 3 years? Okay. Why can't I just call you and say, everything's copacetic? James, everything's copacetic. I got my anatomical facility over here, and you want to come look at I got my wheel body facility. I still got the same route. Hey, I'll send you the pictures. Okay. If you just need the inspection fee, James, I'll send it to you. Okay. Okay. So, but again, I do think this is something that should be evaluated and looked at. Based on some of the other discussions we're gonna have later on the day. Is this the time to say, Sarah, you get with Tom and Jason and come up with some type of apparatus and rule to satisfy this scenario? And I think that's the policy question the committee and eventually commissioners and whoever else is in the rule pipeline need to consider.
No, I agree, and I think what's gonna happen here in our discussion after lunch is when we start looking at the requirements of the inspection, it's easy for those requirements to be met by a NATO and a will body program, right? And we built this as an anatomical facility. It's the temporary sites that will be the most difficult part.
But here's the deal. Maybe I'm wrong. I say I. The commission has not disapproved it. One of these places yet. Okay, they have met the guidelines. Now I've had to work with them. I've had to tell them, go talk to this person. I've had to tell them, hey, here's the formula for the air change requirement. So obviously if you deal with any side of the multiplication sign, you may get there, okay? If you talk with the convention center, I think they can flow more or flow less air to get to that point. So we have to go through that. But, and actually I'm sensitive to what they're saying, okay? But from a policy standpoint, James White, now, maybe if Kyle was in here, my inspector, maybe if Jewel, they would be looking at me saying, hey, James, I think you need to look at this. But where we are right now, okay, Cause I can't do that to Med Market. I can't say, I pass by you all the time. It looks beautiful. I'll just get to say, I don't even go see him this 3 years. It looks the same. He's got the same, hey, James, here's my same layout. Okay, so I don't know how dispositive it is, Dr. Ali, for everybody to be treated the same. That's what I've heard numerous times, okay? But if that is dispositive, that everybody's generally playing under the same rules, okay? I mean, that's a policy question for y'all.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Tom, did you have any other comments?
I don't think anything that would change the direction of the conversation one way or the other right now.
Okay. Okay. But definitely.
I have a quick one. Would that also, we keep saying hotels and convention centers, would that also, do you all put hotels, hospitals and surgery centers into that same bucket?
We would say if it's a fixed location, it is in a position to be approved for the 3-year term.
Right, I think, Jason, what Mr. White's saying is we can go into a surgery center and look at it and say, okay, this is where the body will be received. This is where the dissection will happen. This is how the transportation occurs. And if it meets all the requirements, then it's an approved site. So if you need to go back there, whether today, tomorrow, 5 weeks from now, it's already approved. It's an approved anatomical facility. It's the temporary ones that can change walls, move things around.
To your point, why would you apply as an anatomical facility? You would apply as a temporary anatomical facility. Med-Demar. You would just apply as a temporary medical facility. And here's all my drawings. Here's where everything comes in. I'm temporary Jennings for the year. As long as I'm good.
Whereas hospitals would just apply probably as a regular anatomical.
Well, that would be the argument. If I owned the anatomical, if I owned Med Market, I would say, well, if I just apply as a temporary. Okay.
But I still have to meet the exact same requirements, and I
Still
can
have
be
to meet the-
inspected even more now.
Oh, I could roll in.
Right, you can roll
Well,
anytime you
well,
want.
and-
I'd rather know when you're rolling in, so I can.
And you bring up a good point, Doc. Under statute, we always have the right of inspection. So telling me that this is a caveat that I can still come, I can come anyway. Okay.
Obviously, a lot more to discuss.
Yes.
And it's certainly a topic that's that will be discussed a lot more in the future
Yeah.
here. It is 12:10. Do we want to, at 12:15, take a lunch break here in the next 2-3 minutes here?
It's the pleasure between you and your colleagues. I'm at your.
Why don't we, in 3 minutes here, take a break from 12:15 to 12:45, 30-minute
Okay.
lunch break
Good.
here.
Okay.
So let's take 2-3 minutes to kind of prepare ourselves for the second half of the day.
Okay.
When we get back, we will talk about, pretty much at the inspection
Yeah, we'll
requirement
keep-
standards for facilities.
Keep chipping through.
Yeah, 47.93 is where we'll come back to when we get back, everybody.
Okay.
If there's not any other comments above 479.3 that we've discussed, that someone wants to slip in here in the last 2 minutes before we go to standards for facilities and we come back for lunch. Going once, going twice. Okay, so we will break for lunch. Come back at 12:45. All right. We're going to resume our meeting, but we want to make sure we have a quorum. Ms. Wright, I see you. Professor Mena, if you don't mind turning your video on real quick so we can see you. And while we're waiting for her, Mr. Leposki, I see you. Thank you very much, sir. So as soon as Professor Mena or
Dr. Gilbert.
Dr. Gilbert gets on, then we'll have a quorum, so we may have a minute or two. Oh, there she is.
All righty.
We got our quorum. Okay, as we left for lunch and now we're back, we talked about the next section is 47.9.3 standards for facilities. And what we want to do here is focus on the standards of an inspection. We're gonna break down each section of the inspection. We'll have some, I'm sure, some lively discussion as to why and how for those discussion points. But if we look at the health standard subsection A, and we talk about dissection facilities, that they need to be clean, well ventilated, well lit. We do talk about floors here, about the composition of the floors that can be easy clean, and tables and those things. And some of these things do focus on medical schools when you talk about tanks, which used to be the cadaver tanks that you would roll your body back up out of the formaldehyde or the preserving fluid. And then we talk about storage facilities. There was not any feedback from any of the members about section 1 under health standards on the A on dissection areas need to be clean when well ventilated. And the floor composition that's listed on there.
Can I ask a question from a non-medical, and just thinking about our inspectors, is there like some way we need to define what is considered clean, well ventilated, well lighted? For that, and just in case the inspectors need to be looking for anything in particular?
I think these are general.
Long-term storage, what is,
Yeah.
Well, what I was thinking is right here is just a general statement, because in order to be an approved facility, you gotta meet the requirements, which will be next, and those get into more detail as to what it means for well ventilated. The well lit, I mean, I think that's way too general. What does that mean exactly, right? But it's more the standards that are presented at the next part that I think will go back to this. And we can change some of the wording in here. The storage facilities, like I said, some of this stuff was written when it was more about medical schools and willed body programs. The storage facility at my anatomical facility is inside secure, but they're 2 large coolers, fridge and freezer. And that's our storage facility, right? But they're not there for long-term for use for a year. Most of the donor bodies come in for a week or 2 or 3 and then are back cremated. Very rarely will we have anything go more than 6 months or 12 months unless we have a school using our facility with an embalmed cadaver that they're using over 12 months to dissect slowly with a PhD candidate or something of that sort.
So just for clarification, for like NATOs or anatomical facilities who may just only have the cadaver or specimen for a couple days, or like, I think you said at max you might have it 6 months. What are some differences between the storage capabilities of what entities with that would have versus like longer term?
Well, I think they all need to meet a few requirements. That's security, right? So are they locked? Are they monitored in temperature? So logbooks should be kept to show that the temperature is maintained at 40 degrees for the cooler and 16 degrees for the freezer. I pick those 2 numbers not because they're standards, but they tend to be used. Things like that I think should be looked at. All our freezers and lockers have a key onto the handle, and that room is where the freezers and refrigerators are located, are under key and lock and security camera. So, that's the standards that we need to decide is what does your storage facility look like? So when it talks about sufficient size to handle, that's once again very general. What does that mean exactly? Without undue crowding, what does that really mean exactly? These I think are very vague statements, which don't help. I think it needs to say storage facilities need to meet the standards set in subsection, whatever that is, right?
Right, and again, for our inspection.
Let's slow down. We got Gilbert coming back on. Let's go ahead and let him get in. Okay, you want to tell them what we're doing now, Doc?
Yeah, Dr. Gilbert, we're going on the 47.9.3 standards for facilities, and we're under subsection A health standards right now.
You
And
bet.
we're discussing some of the terms in here are very general and vague, well lit. We don't know what that means. Must be clean, terminal clean. I cleaned it with dry mop, those kind of things. So what I said is those are general statements, and to look at the standards as to define what those general standards mean. Which should be listed next in the next section that we'll get to. And then we were talking about storage facilities. Storage facilities, your place may be completely different than storage facility at my place. Yours may hold more long-term bodies for 12 months or more, whereas other places may hold for 12 days. And so my thought process is your standard should be the same as my standard, and that is should be secure, it should be locked, it should be some kind of logbook be kept on the fact that the temperature is maintained. So you don't lose power and, things go foul, those kind of things. But how long you hold it, I think that's vague. We don't really care if you want to hold it for 2 years, if you want to hold it for 12 days, that's up to you. as long as it still meets the same standard of it's secured, it's locked, it's, respectful to the donor, right? So when it says overcrowding, well, someone may walk into mine and see that I have 50 slats to put the donor bodies on, and someone could say that's crowded. I would say, well, no one's being stacked on top of the other, so it's not crowded. So I'm not a big fan of vague terms like that. I think of it more of, you know, if it's respectful and it's done right, it's more to security and access and, you know, keeping logs of the refrigeration process that are more important.
And some of the questions I was asking was geared towards more of our inspectors who do not, unlike the anatomical board members, when y'all conducted the inspections, y'all lived and breathed this, you kind of knew what to look for, whereas our inspectors don't have any background. So the more specific or minimum standards or range we can put in place, that will help them also kind of know what to look for, measure. Like, for example, when you were talking about the refrigeration, I know you just pulled numbers out of your head, but is there a generally accepted for refrigeration of cadavers and anatomical specimen, it needs to be at this? If it's going to be for long-term use, which long-term might be defined a year or more, or I don't know how y'all want to say it, then it needs to be the fridge storage area, freezer needs to be at this temperature, or like the range of whatever temperature. Like that kind of stuff will help us on the inspection side know, okay, this is good, this is not good, kind of thing.
Yeah, we can certainly pull ranges from different groups that kind of gone over this and give kind of, you know, general rules of within 5 degrees of this temperature. I don't want to sit there and start to throw out numbers that you have to be at this number, you have to be close to this number. Because, yeah, there's a range, but that certainly can find that out. When you start looking at things like preparation area, fully equipped with a table and drain of the approved type, once again, very vague. And what does that mean? Can it be a hopper with a hole in a table where if you're washing the body, whatever dirt that comes off goes into a hopper? Once again, very vague. You know, whether we need that line in here or not, I'm not sure, or whether we need recommendations from those groups that have a willed body program and say, this is how our room is set up and it should be something close to this, versus a NATO may be a little bit different because they're not using a lot of the preservatives or formaldehydes and embalming fluids. They may not need that. So I don't know how to recommend that to the commission. As to the
Well,
wording.
so Dr. Aaliyah, I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I too, words matter. So I think it's important that we have this conversation. But, you know, we could argue that even though groups that are not doing embalming, those groups are often, not always, they're often parting a body, which is going to lead to a significant degree of blood or tissue that needs to be cleaned and washed. So whether it's embalming or whether it's preparation, the ability to rinse and clean and have appropriate materials or equipment is really important. I think we would agree on that.
Yeah, I would agree with you too. So the question is, if an inspector goes in, what is he or she looking for, right? I think that's what Ms. Hartsfield's getting to is, what are we telling them that they need to look for? If you wash this body on, this is your dissecting table, where is the ability to drain off this table, clean this table? If you're gonna wash it off, and where is that washing into, right? So I think having those more specifics for inspectors would be helpful for them.
Well, and not only for the inspectors, but to the extent that we get into investigations, complaints, to the extent that if necessary, there's disciplinary action, which may have come due to a SOA agreement, or my commission or my investigators and inspectors have to walk across the street and sit in front of a district judge and make the case. So, so yes, you know, more clarity there. And, you know, Dr. Gilbert has a point, you know, regardless if you're embalming or not, you know, there's certain cleanliness or hygienic stuff that, you know, that has to be done for everybody. Okay. So, you know, like I told you this morning, I don't think we're very far from where we want to be. especially I haven't been to Dr. Gilbert's place yet, but I hear it is the exemplar of exemplars. Okay, and if we could just nail that down, okay? And those are things that you give Sarah the list, she can just put those in.
I think to me, that's a much wiser way of going about it,
Okay.
have specific bullet points of here are the things that are expected, right? And I think Dr. Gilbert and Dr. Hubbard, from your will body program experience and from NATO experiences on our side, we can come together with a list that makes sense, that's not onerous, but should be expected of a NATO or a will body program or.
And since this is what y'all do, y'all wanna just come up with that list and then shoot it over to Sarah, okay?
And I mean, and kind of, I think general descriptions, kind of like where you say, where this has, that the preparation must be fully equipped with the table and drain of the approved type. So, okay, kind of like what you were talking about earlier with the drain, okay, what do we need? Or maybe just a description of what we need to be looking for the drain, like a drain that allows the water to empty out to this or sufficiently make sure fluids are disposed of here. Like y'all kind of know, just something that we're.
Just curious, do you have to have a certain zoning to build your facility?
The anatomical facility? No.
Okay, so embalming rooms in funeral homes have to have a certain zoning. It's the same zoning as a gas station. And that covers the drainage.
Right, so we're not cleaning and draining and those things at the anatomical facility, but at the NATO where the body is receiving it first is in a funeral home on the, well,
So it
on
would
that
have the
property, so
right
it's
zoning.
already zoned that process. I didn't know that there was a zoning.
Dr. Gilbert? Dr. Gilbert, did you hear Commissioner Tips' question?
I did. To my knowledge, there's not a zoning requirement, or wasn't when we established our facility, other than what the university and the city of Lubbock required. So, what I was going to ask is that, if there are standards here and language that the Funeral Services Commission feels are important for their facilities, it may be that we can draw from some of that language as well.
Ms. Wright?
Yeah, I was gonna say, with being an anatomical facility, I don't have any tables with drains in it because we're not doing any gross like major disarticulations. That's already taken care of by the time we get the specimen, and we're not doing any embalming. So I can see where that makes sense, the table drain in the NATOs and in any facility that's doing embalming. But we've never had a need as an anatomical facility to have a drain for a table.
Right, and I see, Mr. Owens, you have your hand up too. Thank you, Ms. Wright.
Yes, so in the past conversations, you guys have talked about AATB. AATB has this covered in their standards, specific to storage temperatures. And they put that back on the institution to establish their own temperature range limits as their NATOs, because we all have different temperature limits. So in the past, you guys have talked about being duplicative in nature. So if you're allowing AATB approved organizations, they have already inspected the NATO facilities for a lot of these things that you're talking about.
Well, these inspection requirements aren't required for NATOs. We're covering for anatomical facilities and will body programs right now. But it would be good to, that's a good point of looking at AATB standards and
That's
see.
what I was going to, is I don't want to pick a
Yeah.
number because there's already
Yeah.
established
Okay.
ranges out there,
Mhm.
and the AATB certainly
Okay,
has
just
all those.
just get the book out, just look at those as well. But as I think it was Dr. Gilbert stated, let's sit down with Kyle also and look at look at his inspection. And if there's anything that may be applicable to will body programs and anatomical facilities, we want to include that as well.
Sounds good.
So we've talked about preparation area, embalming. This will be more specific to groups that do embalm, of making sure that everything's appropriate and intended for the use of the cadaver and won't present health hazard. And I think we already spoke about OSHA rules and regulations that they need to meet. So we would ask those groups that do embalming to send that paperwork to show that they're OSHA certified. And they have embalming licenses and they have a certified embalmer that's been
Okay.
licensed in the state of Texas, right?
I think we could do it more general, like just meeting all local, federal,
Yeah,
state.
exactly.
requirements.
That's exactly right. And then
And,
technical,
well, you're talking about an embalming license, that's us.
well,
yeah,
exactly. I
yeah.
mean, if you're gonna embalm, you're gonna have to have a Texas embalming license,
Okay.
right? And usually that has something, I don't know if you have the funeral home director also, if you have an embalmer,
Depends.
Well, if it's just embalming, it's just the embalmer in charge.
right? So you don't need a.
If it's a
But an
commercial
embalmer is a
embalming.
funeral director.
I didn't know
They're,
that.
they're dual.
Oh,
Yeah, they can be, yeah.
They can be, but they're not.
So all is a funeral. Funeral directors can be solo.
So moving on to B, section B there, technical support of certified institutions or organizations directly accept bodies have to have a funeral director to supervise the transport of the cadavers and a licensed embalmer to perform the embalming procedures. If the institution is unable to employ these, you have to maintain a current valid contract with a licensed funeral director or licensed embalmer. I don't have any comment into that, as you either need to have one or you're not gonna be doing the process.
Okay.
Is there any feedback on that part of it? Okay,
And I just may make some minor grammatical changes to reflect entities rather than institutions. Since,
Thank you.
I mean, I don't know, I said that, maybe NATO's, well,
I mean, NATO's, I know our NATO has to have a funeral director
Oh.
With a valid contract with us, so every NATO in the state of Texas by Texas Funeral Services Commission rules should have.
Well,
Does the commission say that anybody who obtains a body, a whole body for donation, must have a funeral director either as an employee or contracted as a valid
well,
vendor to?
I don't think the commission has said anything yet. I just know with the current SAB rule,
Okay, so this is a SAP rule.
at least, well, that is a vestige of a SAB rule, that going forward, like they do now, Dr. Gilbert, either has a funeral director on staff or contracts with one, and that includes embalmer as well. You know, they either contract with one or have one on staff. I mean, that's,
So
apparently that's been in their rule for some time.
is a NATO underneath that rule too?
Well, this is why you're getting paid the big bucks as the chair, and along with your other,
$0,
your other colleagues. And then this is why we include the public end on this as well. I think you're gonna hear a variety of, scenarios on that. Some NATOs may say, you know, we just work through the funeral, we just work through whatever funeral, we just work through funerals. I think it would be wise to get some, you know, comment from your folks that have NATOs on how do they have those licensed personnel in their facility.
Do we have any other NATOs online today?
Besides the Mary?
At least right now, right.
I'm not a NATO, but I do have a question about this. So it says that, you know, they must contain a current valid contract to perform these procedures, and that one of the procedures listed is transport. I know a lot of NATO's whole body programs just use freight companies to transport. So is this saying that to physically drive the specimens, that has to be done by a funeral director?
No, my understanding, and I hope I don't jump the gun here, my understanding is your NATO has a funeral home director as kind of a supervisory role, right? That doesn't mean they have to do the transportation, they have to do anything. It's just right now, the SAB rule says you're supposed to have someone either contracted with your organization or employed with your organization. But it doesn't mean that the business of transport only goes to them and the business of cremation only goes to them. It's just been something that's been added on there. I know we have a funeral home director on our NATO and they do half of our transportation for us, but we've used many other transportation organizations too that have nothing to do with the funeral home director. Now,
Thank you for the clarification.
I mean, it does seem that it's saying they'll need to have a licensed funeral director to supervise the transport of cadavers or license embalmer perform. I'm okay with looking into that on statutory requirements.
Well, we have a great funeral director right here.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to be presumptuous and say, I think I know what she's gonna say, but, do I have to be a funeral director to do the transport, or do I need to be under the supervision?
Supervision.
And to you, as a
Well, so-
worldwide licensee, what does supervise mean?
They would work for you.
Okay.
And.
You don't need to be in the car with me.
No,
So hold on a second. If I have a NATO and I have a funeral home director,
but we are supposed to have a funeral director at the first call for the removal of the remains, required a funeral director there.
Listen,
But just transporting to
Okay.
the cemetery or to the church.
or how about transporting from the hospice to the NATO? Patient passed away at their house or a hospice program. Now the transport group receives and brings back to the NATO where we do have a funeral home director that's contracted out.
So for us, we would have to have a funeral director at the house. Doesn't mean they have to drive off with the remains, but they have to be at the house. Most of the time they do because two people will go together in one vehicle. And one of them has to be a funeral director.
And then statute has first clause, the beginning of the relationship and duty of a funeral director to take charge of a dead human body and have the body prepared for burial or disposition by embalming, cremation, or another method. So I don't know if that's something we could.
So I have an issue with this because
Okay.
2 a.m, I'm gonna call my funeral home director and say, we have to go pick up this body now.
That's
So-
what we do.
But it could be
I
a
did that last night.
representative of the,
It's 2:30.
but it could be a representative of that funeral home director, correct?
No. A funeral director has to go. Doesn't mean it's the owner of the funeral home, but a funeral director has to be there for the removal. With an associate, it can be a funeral assistant.
Sure.
That comes and assists.
What is our, I would like to, what is Dr. Gilbert and his community of will body? What do they do?
Gilbert starts. I just want to say it's really hard to, for me at least, to hear you guys. Like I'm really having a
Yes, I can't hear that well. That's why I feel like my face is up in the camera.
Okay, we're working on it.
And
Um,
then Mena can also give that kind of input.
Okay,
She understands that.
Cody has his hand up, and on the funeral director world, Cody has his hand up, and then we can go to Professor Mena, and then maybe we can get some context from Dr. Gilbert on how they have operated as a will body program in these scenarios. And then we'll get to
So-
Tom too.
I'll jump in there on it. I took the verbiage on that one too, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, but having the licensed funeral director for transportation, I took that to mean the original transportation from wherever the body is coming from to a NATO or will body program. Just like a funeral home is going to send out a funeral director, licensed funeral director, to make a first call specifically if the family may be present. That's how I took this. You know, whether the death is at a hospital or a hospice facility at home, and this person has signed paperwork to be a donor, they're going to donate their body, then that's why we had funeral director in there. That was my understanding when I read through that. That it's similar fashion to a funeral home sending a licensed director out, and I know in our profession we always talk about it being if the family's there. That's why you want a licensed funeral director. A lot of that goes back to FTC and discussing costs and so forth. Not that that would necessarily come into play. I just saw that mirroring what we do with a first call in funeral service. And because we have split licensure, that could be the same person as the embalmer. If they are duly licensed as a funeral director and embalmer, it could be two people. But I didn't look at that as being any subsequent transportation, because in Texas, you don't have to be licensed to simply transfer a body. I saw that as the original transportation to that receiving institution. That was my thought.
Thank you, sir. And before we get to the other hands that are up, I guess I have a question for you, Commissioner, is the fact that they're being donated for, the whole body donation program, does that change anything on the funeral director needing to be there? Versus we are going to then bring it to the funeral home to then go through the burial route or cremation route.
I don't think so. I mean, maybe we can see what Ms. Mena thinks.
And then Dr. Gilbert.
What Dr. Gilbert
Yeah,
thinks.
Okay, Dr. Gilbert, were you gonna say something? I don't see your hand up. Oh, you,
Yeah, I'm glad to respond. There's just four other people with their hands up. I figured I'd let them go and then I would answer.
All right,
Okay.
so we've got Dr. Minna, Professor Minna.
yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I think I'm echoing what Commissioner Tibbs and Mr. Lepaski are saying. And then Ms. Hartsfield also gave the definition of a first call. So the definition of a first call really is your first initial contact with that body. That's the first call. The transfer then, like Mr. Lepaski said, anyone can make a transfer once that first initial contact has been made with the body and the body has been properly embalmed. And then if we're transferring to a location, that's a transfer and you don't need a license for that.
Thank you.
So I think that's.
Bethany.
Thank you. Bethany, I think I see your hand up and we'll get to you next, Tom.
Yeah, I just wanted further clarification. I'm not sure if it's because I couldn't hear the commissioner or not about whether the licensed funeral director applies to will body programs and NATOs as well. Historically, when I previously worked for will body program, we did not require that when we made our pickups, whether it was residentials or hospitals.
Right. Yeah.
It was just staff.
I'm gonna kind of agree with what you're saying is with the will body programs in a NATO, we've never had a funeral home director go to the site. Now, they may have been part of the transportation group and it just turned out that they were there. But that's something that I didn't know anything about. Tom?
No, that was a mistake. Sorry.
Okay. Dr. Gilbert?
Yeah, so I just, I was conferring with our group. So all of our removals are done with a licensed funeral director, either through a mortuary service where the funeral director would go, that's part of the mortuary service to go do the removal. Or if it's part of our team, we have 2 licensed funeral directors on our staff that if they're doing direct removals, they'll go and do that. Now, I think there may be a caveat where they wouldn't necessarily have to do that if it's at a hospital where the family's not present. But I think our standard is that we want we will contract with a mortuary service to do a lot of our removals because we're out in West Texas and it's 250 miles away from something. But if we do local removals, one of our funeral directors will be involved in that removal, either from the hospital or from the home or hospice.
She have her hand back up.
No, I think she left it out.
Okay, and what this seems to me,
Bethany, your hand is still up on your screen if you want to take that off. Thank you.
yeah, what this seems to me is, this is a policy decision, because as Bethany described it, I think that's probably where the standard is now, okay? But again, in the collective wisdom of the legislature, Mr. Chair, this is one of the reasons that we're working with these programs now, okay? And I think what we would hear from the funeral licensure community, to the extent that it can, why do we have these bifurcated, this kind of different bifurcated rules for, especially when it intersects so much with the funeral licensee industry? Why do you have, these different, standards here, if the requirement, and again, we're talking about the decedent, right? And respect and the care of the decedent. So I think this is a policy decision, recommendation you're gonna make to the commission. Are we gonna have a requirement to include that? And before we even get to the collective wisdom of the legislature, think about just what the current SAB rule, why was there I don't know if Dr. Gilbert was around when this was incorporated into their rules, but why did they see the need to include these licensure competencies in their rules?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And obviously there's some other reasons why you rely on licensure competencies, okay? That's the reason why we got staff attorney over there. So when something blows up, I can say, licensed attorney told me. Yes, Dr. Gilbert.
Yeah, I think, well, the SAB rules really haven't been changed since 1980 something, and I wasn't here.
Okay.
But I think this really gets to the basic idea of dignity, respect, appropriate handling of the body, especially in the context of an initial removal from a place of death. And so this is where it settles for me, is that in my opinion, because this is under Funeral Services Commission, I would think that the key is the disposition piece. In my opinion, everything, whether a loved one's going to a funeral home or to an anatomical facility, will body program or NATO, it would seem as though the removal processes and the regulations surrounding removal should be the same for under the Funeral Services Commission. Once that body becomes, the disposition of that body is with donation and it's received in the facility, then it would seem as though transportation and transfer would fall under perhaps different sets of regulations. But the removal, the initial interaction and removal of that deceased from their place of death, it seems like that would all be under the responsibility of Funeral Services Commission, no matter where they were headed. Once they get there, then it would follow the regulations there. I think that's why the burial transit permit discussion occurred early on in this meeting, because the disposition was donation, and then it became the custody of the anatomical board. But my opinion would be we should be following the same regulations for removals as any other funeral home or mortuary service to get them to our facility. That's my thought.
Thank you, Dr. Gilbert. Any other points of discussion on that?
Me personally, I disagree. In the past, I've seen it mostly done with students and things like that when I worked at a will body program, and with the correct training and things like that, I feel like it could be handled appropriately.
Yeah, just from the regulatory prospect, going from if this got to a complaint, just going through the whole thing, if this is sort of like the legal standard for normal funeral activities, is that funeral director is there on that first call, okay? People, why would we change it? Because, and so we don't want to get jerked here by our staff attorney too much, but when we get to that other issue, the other entities, okay, they would kind of have to get that too, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think the deal is wouldn't be a requirement that you have to have one 24/7 on payroll. You can contract. So I believe if I heard Dr. Gilbert correctly, way out there in West Texas, where everything within 250 miles is considered your area, okay, you'll contract with a funeral home or mortuary service 250 miles away to get that decedent to your program, okay? But in Lubbock, he has his team of hired funeral directors on staff that kind of handle, everything in their vicinity. All right. So again, I just think, from a regulatory standpoint and what we have to face in the office, if it gets to other serious scenarios, is try to keep the regulations and the statute consistent across the board to the extent that we can. And I think that's why the Sunset Commission came to me in August of 2022, because we have some of these institutions already in process.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I feel like in the funeral home industry, I feel like the funeral director is necessary for these first calls and removals because they're there to protect the consumer because you're entering a contract with this funeral home and there is an exchange of services and monetary exchange. So I can understand having the funeral director there to protect the consumer, but since there's no consumer in this aspect, that's just my thinking that it's not necessary, in my opinion.
Yeah, Mr. White, I just got a response from one of our funeral directors on our team, and the question I ask him is, when mortuary service does removal, is there always a funeral director present? His simple response is no. It's a gray area of law. If the family is present, then it's important to try to have a funeral director in case they start asking anything in person or about services and pricing. Sometimes there's no funeral director in the situation and they tell the family that someone will call them if they have questions. Some of this is FTC laws on pricing, which gets to Ms. Wright's comment. If the family is not present, then funeral director or a non-funeral director may make the removal. TFSC has regulations as well that he said he would need to look up. Transporting a body long distance does not require the driver to be a funeral director, which gets to a previous discussion. I think the way that it functions for us out here is if we had a donor that was in Pampa and they died, we would contract with the mortuary service to get that body here. That mortuary service has contracts and contacts in that region. Most likely they would get a local funeral home to do the first call removal following the regulations there. And then once it gets to their facility, the mortuary service would pick it and bring it up here. So it sounds to me like there is some gray area. My general opinion is that we ought to be following as much as possible seems like it's a dangerous place to go if we don't have a similar or same process that the commission requires for funerals, but I understand there's a difference in cost and all of that. So anyway.
I see one hand raised. TJ, if you want to let him in.
Hi, yes, can you hear me okay?
We can. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Tyler Johnson. I'm a licensed funeral director in Texas. I also work at a wheel body program. And I apologize, it's starting to rain on me, so might be a little bit of noise. In my experience in the funeral home and in my current experience when I still utilize funeral homes to pick up a decedent to bring to us, again, even when I was at the funeral home, we did not utilize licensed funeral directors to go on those removals, nor did our mortuary employ licensed funeral directors to go on those removals. All that was required by their standards was a funeral director in charge to supervise. And I think that might be some of the key wording in the legislation is that a funeral director is supposed to be supervising these things, but it's kind of loose on what supervision means. I would say that would be very difficult for the funeral homes in our area, in the Fort Worth area, if they had to take on the burden of all the calls that we typically get as donors to our program. The mortuaries and funeral homes in the Fort Worth area would not be able to employ enough funeral directors to go on all of our calls for our program alone. That's all.
Hey, thanks a lot, TJ.
Thanks, TJ. Appreciate that input. And, the more discussion to have, we're gonna have Ms. Hartsfield look at it to see what is appropriate and what makes sense is where that discussion's taking us to. So let us look at it again and see.
If we can keep with that one, that
the language that's here, the supervising part of it and to direct.
Yes.
And so let's look at that language and see if we can clean it up. But I appreciate everybody's feedback on that topic. If it's okay, we're gonna flip the page to the next slide, which is actually the safety standards and some of the inspection standards that are expected to be met. Which leaves us a little bit more than an hour here to go over this. Safety standard subsection C, section 1 here in air exchange. Talks about all storage.
I was just going to ask the screen is not where you are, Dr. Ali.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Okay.
We're gonna share our screen here in just 1 second. Does that look okay to you guys? Safety standard C? Okay. So, looking at air exchange, the first subsection there, all storage, preparation, dissection, skill, lab, research areas that cadavers and anatomical specimens will be located, must have sufficient air handling machinery to provide for not less than 7 full air exchanges per hour. Should be an actual certified air exchange measurement, not an engineering estimate of potential air exchanges. So a lot of great discussion about this.
Yeah.
Whether it needs to be a certified air exchange measurement versus an engineered estimate, why 7?
And that was my comment. What's in statute, I mean, what's in rule now, okay? And, what some language is proposing, okay? And the idea is, I don't know if one is a higher standard than the other. I don't want to just make a blanket assumption. I think I know what it is, but the deal is, what are we trying to avert? What are we trying to create to change the standard from what it is now? Even if we keep the 7, okay?
Well, I think and Dr. Gilbert hop in anytime on this, the reason these rules were set in place when we created our anatomical facility and we meet all these standards, was due to airborne pathogens.
Yes.
Right. Number 2, smells, noxious odors. Number 3, any chemicals more used in will body programs, such as the embalming solutions that you want to vent out. And so, with those taken into account, I believe that's why the whole idea of air exchange out, right? In the operating room, we have laminar flow to pull anything out, including smoke from bovie usage and those kind of things. So all this makes good sense to me. The question is, why 7? Why not 3?
Why?
And does it matter if you have a certified technician come in and check it out versus the engineered route?
Yeah. If the other scenario has been working with the 7, why are we changing?
Yeah, and so the question is, does it need to be relooked at and wording changed or standards changed, or is it left alone? The subgroup that looked at it just had discussion about it, but no real substance came out of it, like, we need to change it to this, and this is why, and here's the data behind it. There's anecdotal data up there. I think last time we had someone say there's never been a report of any communicable disease, but I've never had a speeding ticket. So,
So you say.
So I say. So, that's my data. So I'm gonna open it up for a minute on the air exchange part. If anybody has real evidence and good data about this that they're willing to share. Tom, I saw your hand go up for a minute, but then you dropped it. Yep, go ahead, Tom.
So I don't know that I have any good data necessarily. I do have the question about why it needs to be, where is it?
Engineered
An
versus
actual certified air exchange measurement versus a math problem, basically based on the CFM and the volume of the room to show, what the air handler on any given room could, would do in an hour. So I guess that's my first question is, why isn't the calculation sufficient? Why does a certified air exchange measurement? Because my understanding is now we're really adding to cost because the certified air exchange measurements get into the thousands of dollars. And if we're talking about hotels, every time a company wants to do something in a hotel, they would have to rehab an air exchange certification technician come out and do that.
Valid statements. Dr. Gilbert, do you care to give any kind of comment regarding that?
Well, I would want my comment not to be directed to Tom's comment directly, but I think this is an important discussion, specifically related to whether it should be direct or whether it should be estimated. I can speak to our facility as we just went through our tab report for our 3-year inspection, and we have the ability to create, based on calculations, we could create 14 air exchanges. But when we tested them, it wasn't functioning at 14 air exchanges. It wasn't functioning at 10. It was functioning at 8. In fact, we had one room that wasn't functioning at the 7 level. So part of this is designed to say, just because we say we can doesn't mean we are. And it doesn't mean that we were purposefully trying to skirt the rule or the regulation. It's just that the function of the air handlers wasn't doing what we were supposed to do. So it's actually, for us, it was helpful because that inspection allowed us to say, well, this particular damper wasn't doing what it was supposed to, and we needed to repair it. So I think there are some reasonable discussion points as to why it would be an actual. Just because we can calculate it and say it should be this doesn't mean that it is. And so I think that's my answer there. Whether it's 7 or 8 or 6, I think that last time we had some discussion about some CDC guidelines and some other things that were apparently suggesting 8. So I think this decision needs to be based on data, as opposed to the fact that it's an inconvenience and a financial challenge. It needs to be, the purpose of it is to create a protected, safe environment for our participants. And I think that the reason that we're getting pushback on this is that it's a pain to get it done. And so I don't think that's a good reason to change it or remove it as a requirement.
Thank you, Dr. Gilbert. Go ahead, Tom.
So I think those are valid points, Dr. Gilbert, and thank you for making those. I guess I need to go farther back to, in the terms of the types of trainings that we're talking about, which are unpreserved anatomical specimen, what is the safety problem that the air exchanges is actually addressing? Also keeping in mind that as part of a general guideline for any types of training like this, universal precautions are to be being used at all times by anyone in the room, which includes face mask, gowns, gloves, eye covering to a certain extent. So what is the safety concern that the air exchanges are addressing, I guess, is the ultimate question.
Yeah, fair points, Tom, and I understand the perspective. I think at that point, it really becomes an infectious issues with regard to, again, if we're using all of our standard precautions, then of course nothing should happen. But again, I think that you go into an operating room, there's going to be air changes for the safety of the patient as well as the people working in the operating room. So I think the argument can be made, well, these standards were put in place because it was all for anatomical dissection and exposure to chemicals. And I get that, but I do think that there's validity to having appropriate air exchange in the context of working with unembalmed specimens as well. So we may not agree on that point, but that's my opinion.
I don't actually even disagree. I'm just trying to understand better. If we're talking about pathogen exposure, we know that these have all been tested for hepatitis B, C, and HIV 1 and 2, and have come back with negative serologies. So if we're working on a foot that's shown to be negative for these things, what's the medical benefit to having the air exchange? I'm just trying to understand better, because people will ask questions like this. So I like to be able to educate them.
Sure, it's fair. I think that you can get into the general decomposition of a body is going to lead to the potential for bacteria. There's potential if that body might have been tested for HIV and hepatitis, but if it was septic at the time of death, then perhaps that could be an issue. So there's any number of things that the decomposition process might lead to that's we would be taking appropriate precautions to protect our users from those things. Again, well, they have a mask and they have gloves and they shouldn't get sick. I think this really boils down to a perceived appropriate protect of our users. So,
well, I think those are good points. So my second part on this was a colleague actually raised this question. Surgery centers and hospitals, we'll just say surgery center, say it's a 10 OR surgery center, and they've allowed a company to come in and do a cadaver lab in OR1 1 week. And then on the next week, they're going to do OR3. Would they be subject to reinspection? But also, these surgery centers are subject to additional and other regulatory agencies and bodies with standards in order to be able to operate and perform surgeries. Does the TFSC, are their standards, do they supersede the other governing agencies of the surgery centers? Or could they be, okay, if you have credentials by whatever credentialing agencies monitor the surgery centers, then that meets our standards as well?
Well, we're on the air exchange, right?
Sure. Well,
And-
we'll just say just for air exchange.
Okay, well, what is the air exchange on surgery centers? What is their requirement, with these other regulatory bodies?
I don't know the answer to that. I know we use laminar flow, but
And maybe maybe I'm mistaken on the last the last committee meeting. And we briefly had this discussion. And I believe on that, we had guests as well. And some of our guests that was with us was the AATB. Okay. And the issue about tuberculosis and all this came up. And because usually,
We're about to lose a forum, because Lepasky's done Professor Minner will need to step out, because she's got a class in 5 minutes.
hold on, let's see where we are. Cody's off.
Yes, he left earlier, he did a wave.
yeah, he did away.
Yeah.
Okay.
About 3 or 4 minutes ago.
Okay. So we're gonna, okay, so we won't have a quorum. Okay.
When Professor Mena leaves, we will.
She leaves in 5 minutes, yeah.
Just so the whole group knows that,
Oh,
our,
okay.
our group will drop below a quorum here in about 5 minutes. I believe Professor Mena has a class she has to go, lecture to. So, at that point, the meeting will be finished. So, Tom and Dr. Gilbert, I appreciate y'all's feedback on that. Let's spend a little bit more time looking at that. I'll try to see if I can find anything about the surgery centers, what their requirements are, on the air exchange.
And the idea that, the AATB, I don't know if that was their general counsel or whoever, when we were talking about tuberculosis, he said that, there was a CDC standard or some standard of 12.
Right.
Okay. And often my friends in the NATO world say, hey, we got these great standards over here, AATB. Okay. So,
Can I speak to that?
Yeah.
So, and that in particular was CDC guidance for a patient that had known tuberculosis. So when they came out with guidance for doing an autopsy on a patient, again, that had known tuberculosis, in which they essentially create an airborne isolation infection control room, which would have 12 air exchanges per hour. But we also not only do we do the serology testing, but we do a donor risk assessment interview for tuberculosis. So that was sort of taken out of context, and that all the context wasn't provided. So if it was a donor that we knew had tuberculosis, then we would, of course, have those standards, but we would never, as a NATO, accept a donor.
Okay.
who
So
has
Jason, you say we, is that Mary or is that all NATOs?
That's industry standard. That's a declination
Okay, when you say,
criteria.
well, you say industry standard, okay.
That is a NATO declination criteria universally. Known tuberculosis is a thing that people aren't generally taking.
Yeah, so Tom, when you say it's an industry standard or declaration, whatever, is someone going out with the expectation that they're checking if the decedent's been checked or not, and you're in the 12 exchanges of air category or not? Or is it best practices?
To not accept donors that have tuberculosis?
No, or you say industry standard, who's maintaining the standard?
Well, AATB maintains a standard on guidance on on accepting donors with tuberculosis. I mean, Jason can probably speak to that as well. I don't think that's just the Mary doing that.
Okay, so let me ask you and Jason. Based on the questions you're asking, what do you think should be the air exchange requirement?
Coming back to AATV, also on the transplant side, whenever they're doing recoveries for tissues, say it's skin graft, et cetera, whatever it may be, the requirements for air exchange is not even listed. It just says that they have to have ventilation. So that's done in a sterile setting, and that's more to protect the tissue that's being harvested. But the ventilation requirement, they don't have any standard that says it has to be 8, 4, 6, or otherwise for the recovery technicians in the room.
Okay, so, and I'm not being a jerk here, so providing that the tissue is not embalmed, you're saying that there should be, the only requirement should be ventilation. So when my inspectors are, when my inspectors show up at the Gaylord Convention Center, they say, show me your ventilation, okay, inside that convention center. Because, and look, I'm saying this because this is how you guys have laid it out to me. And you're gonna use this same scenario at 13 other places within the next year. And you're telling me there's ventilation. So what does Inspector Bass come back and tell me when he says, no, I didn't see ventilation, or yes, I did see ventilation?
Well, and from a non-technical standpoint, and in my experience, having been in bioskills facilities and non-clinical spaces that are being used all over the world, you know, an airflow system that works, that you noticeably have air moving in the room, has always been sufficient.
Okay, so I get some, because I've seen this before. I get a piece of paper and I fold it in half and I put it up to the vent and I see it going up to the vent and air is going out. And then I go to another vent, I've seen this, and it's pushing the paper down and air is going, well, pushing paper up and air is going in. Kyle says there's ventilation.
Yes.
Check. And that's in what scenario now?
That's in the transplant scenario. And I say that with Mary as an institution here at Memphis, we have all of our bioskills settings are over 12 air exchanges. And that was when AATB did have it as a requirement, and it was dropped to only include 12 air exchanges per hour when using noxious chemicals. So it was modified about 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay, and this is all based on peer-reviewed research and everything. Okay, I think we've lost
Okay, folks, I appreciate everybody being on today. I know there's a lot of discussion, a lot more to go, but we've lost our quorum now due to one of our members having to drop out. Thank you, everybody that was on today, all the commissioners and all our public people that gave comment today, and all the thank you from the legal side. Thank you, guys, and thank you to all the members. Keep on sending your emails, keep on sending any recommendations or ideas or information you find out, and we'll continue to work on this process.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
strike policy.